Thanks very much. Don't know what. Okay, one of us is doing it, Tom. I don't know who it is.
That's me, yeah. Okay, so I'll
look, I'm going to hand you over to Tom, and if you have any questions, just pop them in the chat. I'm going to be here just to help with any questions or any ideas. And don't be afraid to ask questions relating to ideas you have or problems you might have faced or anything at all that you can think of you think is relevant this morning. No question is silly. So thanks very much, Tom, and thanks for joining us, everyone, and enjoy the session.
Thanks, Trish. Appreciate it. Good morning. Can everyone see that, first of all, the presentation?
Yes.
Very good. Yeah, perfect. Thanks, Tom.
Okay. Very good. So welcome, everyone, this morning to the workshop on the grant application process. As Trish said, I've done a bit of work with other PPNs around the country on similar workshops and other training courses as well. But this seems to be the one that's the most popular because it's probably one of the areas that people are struggling most with in terms of how they can access the various different grants that come up each year, and how they can put their best foot forward and have the best opportunities to get those grants and get awarded funding. Let's give you a small bit of background to who I am and what I do. So Tom O'Leary is my name. My company is O'Leary and Associates Training and Consultancy Limited, and I'm based here in Kerry. I suppose the good thing about Zoom is saves me having to drive all the way to Carlow to deliver a workshop. I can just go from my kitchen to my office at home and do the same thing without driving very, very far, which is great. So I've over 20 years experience as a self-employed consultant working in both in the community and voluntary sector and also in the small business sector. So there's two aspects of my business. One, I work with startup businesses, and the second is I work with social enterprises and not-for-profit organizations. Prior to, I worked in Dublin with Northside Partnership for a number of years as an enterprise officer in the north side of Dublin. And during my time there, part of my role was to work with enterprise projects with community groups as well as working with startups. And then in 2000, I moved back to Tralee, where I'm from originally, and I got a job as a community enterprise officer with Partnership Tralee at the time. They're now part of Northeast West Kerry Development, local development company. And my job there was to work with community voluntary organizations in the Tralee area and the North Kerry area to get them financed to start community projects, so things like road transport, community facilities, childcare projects, etc. And then in 2002, I went out on my own and started my own business doing pretty much the same thing, but for myself. So I work primarily with groups, not-for-profit groups or social enterprises that are looking to develop community projects, community facilities or services in their local communities. That could be a village, town or a parish. I work with them on doing feasibility studies, community planning, area planning, strategic and business planning. I provide mentoring with them on a one-to-one basis, and also we deliver a series of training programs on behalf of local authorities, PPNs and local development companies. And a big part of what I do with these groups is to identify where the finance is for these projects and to assist them either by doing grant applications for them as part of my contract or advising them as to how they can best put together the application forms. So we came up with this program for Kerry PPN and previously the Kerry Community Voluntary Forum a number of years ago, because a lot of groups were struggling with how to write grant applications, what they should put into the application form, how they should word it. And that was when applications were the old kind of paper-based applications. And then since most applications now are gone online, that's created even more problems for people that they're not getting their heads around how to do the applications online and kind of work through these online portals. So what we did at the time was we wanted to kind of create a level playing field for everyone, that, you know, some groups had really good people on board that could do the applications very well. Some people were bringing in professionals to do the applications for them. And then other groups didn't have the in-house people to do the applications, and they just weren't able to afford to bring in professionals. So it meant that they were coming in at a disadvantage because their quality of application wasn't as good as others. So we want to try and level the playing field as best we possibly could by giving everyone the resources and the knowledge and advice as to how to write a good application. So we created this application for them. And it's based really on my own experience of 20 odd years at this stage of writing grant applications, in terms of what the kind of tricks of the trade are, and what are the key things that will get you or give you an advantage over the next group that's looking for the same pot of fund that you're looking for. So this morning's workshop is really looking at kind of what's kind of pre-planning stage before you even look at putting grant applications together. It's about getting organized and understanding what information would be looked for in a grant application, and having that application or having that information ready, so that when the grant application is announced and the funding source is opened, that you're not in a mad panic trying to gather all the bits and pieces of information that they require to be submitted with the application. And we also look at this morning in terms of how you research where the potential sources of grants are and how you get more information about what they're actually looking for. So the key thing with any grant is that whatever organization is awarding the funding, there are specific reasons as to why that grant is being made available, and that reason is normally linked to some sort of policy or strategy. So whether it's government policy, whether it be a county council's policy at local level, or whether it be a funding agency's policy in terms of what type of projects they support, understanding the background to the funds is key, because if you know what they're looking for, you can then develop your project around answering the kind of questions that they have and making your project very suited to what they want to give money for. So it's like when you're applying for a job, you're going to tailor your CV to suit the job you're going for, to make sure that you're ticking all the boxes in terms of you're meeting all the requirements, you're meeting all what they want to see, what type of person they're looking for. With a project that you're looking for funding for, you must make sure your project is ticking those boxes as well, that it's meeting their objectives, meeting their policy objectives. And a lot of groups don't do that, and they're literally just hoping that what they're doing is relevant to the funder and is going to make sense for the funder and answers all the funder's questions. So what we do is we spend a lot of time doing a bit of pre-planning to make sure that what project is going forward has a really good chance of being successful. So we look at, I suppose, financial planning as the first thing. So a lot of organizations will chase grants because they see there's an opportunity to bring money into the organization, which is okay in theory, but it can actually cause problems, because a lot of people will apply for grant aid in the hope that they bring money into the organization, but very often the grants are for very specific projects, and they won't impact on the bottom line, or they won't impact on covering costs that the organization already has. They normally just cover additional projects. So some groups apply for the grant thinking they can use that grant for like general purposes, like to pay the bills, but they can't. They have to use it for specific projects. And the problem is that grant then creates additional costs. Rather than adding money to the organization, it's actually long-term causing the organization a greater cost. So we always look at, before we do any work with groups in terms of applications, we always ask the question, do you really need it? And is this the best option for you in terms of financing the project? Is there other sources of funds that you should look at first? Because again, a lot of groups will apply for grants, they get the grant, and then they realize afterwards, you know, God, we're kind of sorry we got the funding now, because there's a lot of bureaucracy with it, a lot of administration to be done, and it's going to cause more problems or more work they weren't aware of. So grants aren't just a way of bringing additional cash into the organization. Grants are very specific for very specific things. So the key thing I always say to groups, and I've been saying this group for a long time, my background is working within the private sector. So I take private sector mentality to the not-for-profit sector organizations. So a not-for-profit organization must think like a for-profit business, because you have to bring in funding that's going to cover the money that's going out of the business or out of the organization. So if you're spending €20,000 a year on your organization in terms of covering utility bills, rent, insurance, project work, materials, all this kind of stuff, that means €20,000 has to come into the organization from somewhere to keep everything going. So you need to keep an eye on cash flow and look at where the cash is coming from. And grants are part of that, but it's only part of it. So you need to look at how grants tie into the overall organization and where it fits in terms of the funding of the organization. So more money has to be coming in than going out. So a lot of organizations, because they're not for profit, they're always focused on just bringing in enough money to cover the money that's going out. But our mantra with every organization we work with is that you're not for profit, but you're also not for loss. You're not there to lose money. You're there to bring in as much money as you possibly can. And that means you make a reserve. or you make a profit and you bring in more money than you need in a particular year, that's a great thing, because that money sits in a reserve and allows you to develop new projects. It allows you to have money to match finance some grant aid, or allows you to invest back into your project or do different things and new things. Where most organizations are, they're just basically struggling to break even every year. That means they can't develop, they can't expand. They're always under pressure every single year to kind of keep things going. And that causes a lot of stress for volunteers, a lot of volunteer burnout, and a lot of worry for volunteers. And it also prevents new volunteers getting on board, because those new volunteers who might want to get involved are thinking, this organization is constantly looking for money, they're constantly fundraising. It's going to be a stressful kind of environment to be working in, and why would I get involved in it? So what we try to do is look at the bigger picture in terms of funding, what every organization should look at in terms of what it needs, when it needs it, and what's the best source of funding that they can look for. So normally your funding requirements would be to cover operational costs. So that would be like your day-to-day running costs, your week-to-week, month-to-month running costs. Every organization should have a reserve policy. So it should be looking to generate reserves where there's money left in the bank account to cover, unforeseen costs, to cover maybe additional projects you want to run, or whatever it might be. And you'd be aiming to have some sort of reserve every year to allow you to kind of operate that way. Then you're into kind of project funding, and this is really where the grants come in. So some people would apply for grants to do kind of feasibility analysis for larger projects. So they apply for feasibility study grants. And that could be for things like, say, research or planning, or getting plans drawn up, or concept drawings up for building projects, or park projects, or recreational projects, or sports projects. So funding would be available for organizations to spend a bit of money to test if the project will work, and to assess it before they go off and spend a lot of money on a project that might be viable or feasible. And then the bigger one, and the reason why most of you are probably on here today, is look at project development. So looking at capital funding that would be available to you to develop projects, to buy equipment or materials, or to to develop building projects, or to put money into developing projects locally or services locally within your communities. And this is kind of the key area that most people will be looking for grant aid for. Okay, you won't get grant aid in most cases to cover your operational costs. There is specific grants that do provide core funding, and I'll talk about those later on. But the majority of grant aid that is available to most organizations across the sector, whether it be a disability organization, or a youth organization, or an older person's organization, or a sports organization, it is difficult, or if not impossible, to get grant aid to cover ongoing operational costs. Okay, obviously you're not going to get a grant to provide you with a reserve. So most grant aid is around project development or project analysis. So the source of funding then that we would concentrate on with organizations across the board, and this would, obviously the amount of funding that an organization would require would be depending on how big they are and what they do. So some of the groups we work with are very, very small groups, maybe a Thai Towns group working in a local village, or in a small local area, or it could be community council or community development association working in a village or a town, to very large organizations that are hiring 40, 50 staff, that would be generating maybe €500,000 to €1 million a year in terms of turnover to keep projects going. Some of the projects we work with would be very small projects where they need maybe €4,000 or €5,000 just to buy equipment or something at a very small level, to projects that are multi-million euro projects that would require substantial capital grants from the state to like develop large scale building projects. So we would work from the very, very small to the very, very large. And what these groups would require depends on what their costs are. So the sources we look at, and it's important to understand the sources, because if you're looking for grant aid, the funder that you're going to be dealing with will want to see what's your financial strategy each year, that you're not relying on grant aid constantly. They want to see that you're capable of bringing additional funds through fundraising or fees or whatever it might be. So the first thing is fee income, and that would be where organizations are charging for services or products or facilities like rental or whatever of space, to very, very simple membership models. So some groups might be charging for any services, or they might be renting space, or they might have any products. So to bring money in, they charge like an annual membership fee to be involved in a group, or they'll look at maybe some way of bringing in some sort of fees. You've got one-off grants. So one-off grants will be grants that come up usually kind of annually, and there's a call for them annually, and you apply for them, and they're to provide funding for one-off projects. So that might be like, outdoor recreation scheme grants, or leader grants, or Thai Towns grants, or energy grants, or something like that. There'd be one-off, so they're for one specific project. The work is done, the job is done, that's it. And they come up either annually, or they might be just something that the government come up with randomly. So like last year, last couple of years, there's been plenty of grants for COVID intervention schemes. They obviously weren't there before COVID, and hopefully we won't have to have them again. Not that the grants weren't nice, but COVID wasn't nice. So hopefully they come up with a grant to something similar, but not that that's COVID related. Core grants then would be some organizations across the country are receiving what's called kind of core ongoing state aid. And they would be things like, say, childcare organizations, community childcare groups, disability organizations primarily, and social enterprises or rural transport companies. So we work with a lot of disability organizations that would be in receipt of Section 39 or Section 38 funding from the HSE. So they have a contract to deliver these services on behalf of the HSE, and the HSE then would give them a core grant each year based on a plan and based on a contract in terms of what they will do. And that core funding covers things like staffing costs and some overheads. PUB will administer the community services program, and the community services program provides grant aid for staffing to social enterprises that are providing social services or community facilities or community services on the ground in local areas. And then you have TUSLA, who provide grant aid for childcare providers, community childcare providers, preschools, after school, etc. So they would have a contract annually to provide services on behalf of the state, and the state would fund them through these grants packages each year. They also have to generate their own funds and do their own fundraising and get other grants, but primarily their core funds are covered by core grant aid. The majority of groups we work with across the sector would not have core grant funding, so they're not reliant on any one source of funds. They have to kind of look for kind of a cocktail of funding every year to keep the show on the road. Then we have fundraising, which you're all very familiar with. We've all done at some stage, whether it be part of our core work we do within the organization, or if we're just dragged in to help out on a fundraising day, or on a backpacking day, or whatever it might be. So every organization should have some sort of fundraising strategy, that you're just not doing fundraising for the sake of it, and it's planned well in advance, and you're looking at maximizing the funds you can bring in to the organization. And fundraising is very important when it comes to grant aid, because the funding organization that are giving you the grant, they want to see, are you capable of raising your own funds on a long-term basis? Okay, because let's say you won the lotto this week, right? And you decided that with your lotto winnings, after you go on a lovely holiday, you want to set up some sort of trust fund that you're going to provide support for community groups in your area. And you've all these people looking for money off you and applying for funds from you. You're not going to give it out randomly to everyone. You want to see, well, if I give this money to this group, are they capable of keeping this thing going afterwards? Are they capable of bringing in funds afterwards to keep the project going? Or are they going to be constantly struggling to fund the project once we give them the initial funds to start it up? So the analogy I always use is that it's like giving someone a grant to buy a car, okay, but they don't have a driver and they don't have diesel, right? So they're a lovely car, but they can't drive it and they can't put fuel into it because they can't afford to pay a driver and they can't afford to pay for fuel. So the person who's going to give you the grant for the car is thinking, well, there's no point giving these guys a car because they haven't proven to us that they'd actually be able to drive it afterwards, or they'd be able to afford to keep it going afterwards, because they haven't proven to us that they can actually raise money outside these grants. So it's really important that when you're looking for funds from a funding organization, that you're proving to them that you have the capacity to raise your own money and additional funding each year. Okay, and that's what we call your fundraising strategy. So you can put in on paper, on the application form, we have a fundraising strategy and our funds come from the following sources. Okay, so it's really important. So some people say, why do you concentrate on fundraising when we talk about grants? Because what I just said to you there is that without the capacity to raise money yourselves, it's unlikely that you're going to get a grant from someone. Okay, because the grant is only going to give you the initial funding to start something up or to cover the cost of a project, but that project has to be sustained afterwards. And in every grant application, they ask you, how are you going to sustain this project long term? If you haven't shown that you have capacity to fundraise, then you're not going to sustain it. So that's really important. I know Minton mentioned there about developing a community or recreational park. If you get funding to develop a recreational park, put in pathways, signage, biodiversity areas, sensory gardens, whatever you want to do, you get the funding to do that. But in 12 months' time, when there's no funding there in terms of grant aid, who's going to maintain it? Who's going to cut the grass? Who's going to keep the paths clear? Who's going to, upgrade the site every year? Who's going to pay for the insurance every year? So that's what they want to know. How are you going to sustain it? Online fundraising was something we were always championing for many, many years, and everyone kind of ignored us, to be honest. And then COVID came in, and people realized we can't fundraise anymore. We can't go to backpacking. We can't do our golf classic. We can't do a race night. We can't do our fashion show. We can't do our bake sale. We can't do our church cake collection. We can't do anything because we can't physically meet people. So how do we fundraise? So they looked at online fundraising, and it opened many, many doors to people because they realized that if we're online, we're not reliant on our local community or our local village or our local town or parish. Anyone, anywhere in the world can donate us money. We had a club in West Kerry, Dingle GA Club. They've raised 1.2 million for the club this year through a raffle to win a house. So they win a house in Dingle campaign. They raised 1.2 million, more than any county board nationally raised, Dublin, in the last 12 months. 70% of their 1.2 million came from the United States of America. Okay, because it was online. Obviously, Dingle is a very, very strong brand in Ireland and a very strong brand from a tourism perspective internationally. 70% of their funding, of their money raised, came from the States. The person who won the house in Dingle lives in New York. So it just shows you the power of going online. You've got a massive diaspora all over the world that want to get involved in projects, and it's what's happening into that. Sponsors, again, partners, corporate partners, donors, philanthropy, these are all, again, sources of potential funding that you can go after every year. And then you have loans and finance from commercial banks, or more importantly, from the social banks. So two social banks in Ireland are Carlow and Community Finance Ireland. Both of them do amazing work across the country in terms of financing community projects. For most grant applications that are for capital projects or for larger scale projects, you won't get all the funding through the grant. You might get 75% of the grant, or you might get 50% of a grant, or maybe 90% of a grant, but the balance has to be raised by yourselves. And with every grant you apply for, to draw down the grant, you have to spend the money first. So you're going to need some element of bridging finance. So if an organization offers you 50,000 euros of a grant towards an 80,000 euro project, you have to spend the 80,000 euros first and then look to draw down the grant that's been approved to you. So you have to spend first and then retrospectively claim the money back from the grant agency. So you need bridging loans, and they will come from Carlow or Community Finance Ireland. Some commercial banks will give loans to community projects also, and also obviously credit unions are there as well to give out loans to community projects. And then you've got the last one is in-kind contributions. So rather than getting cash from people or from companies, organizations, you get the value of that in labor, in terms of voluntary labor, or volunteers getting involved and giving their time. Materials might be donated to you, or equipment might be donated to you. So a lot of groups you work with, for example, they might organize 10 people to paint the building on a Saturday, and they get the paint sponsored by a local DIY hardware store. Most high towns groups that I work with, their flower beds, their hanging baskets, things like that, they're all sponsored by various different companies. So instead of them giving money to them, in some cases, they'll actually give them the flowers and the bulbs and the hanging baskets and stuff in lieu of cash. Or in some cases, they'll actually give their staff over as volunteers to work with a group on a voluntary basis. Maybe it's a team building exercise, something like that. So this kind of myriad of funds that are out there. Why it's relevant to grant aid is that, as I said, you have to show how your fundraising strategy or funding strategy is just more than just chasing grants every single year. So it's really important from a funder's perspective that they see there's some sort of sustainability within your organization. And as I said, the amount of money you need to raise all depends on how big your project or big the organization is. and how much work you do in the local community and how big the local area is. So the one we're going to focus on today is grant aid. Now, all of you have at some stage have probably attempted to write a grant application, have completed a grant application, and hopefully a lot of you have been successful in getting grants. But we've all been through the process of applying for a grant and getting that, letter or email saying, unfortunately, you did a great application, but the fund was oversubscribed, the standard generic email comes back and you weren't successful this time. And, we've all been there. We've all had the refused applications. And I suppose really there's no kind of magic wand to this in terms of, you could have the best application in the world done, well written, well presented, well thought out, a very strong argument behind it, and still get turned down. Because the reality of grant aid is that typically when a fund is made available, whether it be through a government department or a local authority or a local development company or whoever, typically the grant and the money that's available in the pot, there's not enough to go around to everyone. They're normally well oversubscribed every single year. So the funding agency that are assessing the applications, they have to look at ways of reducing the amount of grant applications they first of all have to assess, and then they have to look at culling some of the applications and saying, look, sorry, you didn't meet the grade, and you're not going to be awarded funding. It won't be mentioned publicly and it won't be said loudly by anyone, but it is in a lot of cases very political, grant aid, and I have no problem saying that. The reality is that there's politicians and TDs all over the country. Okay, they're in every county. It can't be centralized to one area. It can't be all the funds can't go to one county or to one province every time. It has to be spread out across the country. There has to be good news stories for politicians to bring back to their local constituency. If you have a situation where a county hasn't received grant aid from a government department in over 2 years, you can nearly guarantee that they're going to get funding sometime soon, because they have to be seen to be putting the money out there. Now, having said that, they have to be good applications as well. They're not going to give grant aid for the sake of it, but there has to be some sort of geographic spread with these things as well. So you have to make sure that you are looking at the local perspective as well, in terms of, is this meeting local need? Is it tied into local policy and county policy as well as national policy? So with grant aid, the key thing that I want to focus on today is to get you in ready so that you know about the pre-planning process that goes into writing the grant application. This isn't all about writing the application, it's about all the work that goes into having everything ready so that you're able to put a good application together. So I kind of compare writing the grant application to baking a cake. Even if you know how to bake the cake and you know what the recipe is and you're very good at doing it, you still need the ingredients to put into it. So without the information, without the ingredients, you're not going to be able to put together the application properly. No matter how good you are at doing these applications, people ask us the whole time, Tom, can you write the application first? Can you do the grant application first? Yeah, no problem whatsoever. But I need the following. I send them probably 2 pages of questions that I need to get information from. And they're like, but I thought you were doing the application. All I'm doing is wording it. I'm not going to come up with the ideas. I'm not going to come up with the background. I'm not coming up with the rationale behind it. That has to all come from the group itself. And 9 times out of 10, they don't have that preparatory work done. So it means that you're rushing the application, or you just don't have enough information to put a good enough case together for the application when it comes to writing it. So types granted, as I said, the specific grants would be for, like, say, pilot projects, one-off projects, like leader funding, or for example, when there is the local authority water program. It's just one random example I gave, but there's many grants to come up throughout the year, and they're annual grants that come up, sometimes not at the same time every year, which is kind of annoying. They can change the deadlines and change the timing of it, but they do come up pretty much annually, and they're for one-off projects. Okay, and one-off projects can be dangerous because it can increase your longer-term costs, because adding an additional project to your overall organization. For example, pilot projects are just that. They're pilots to get things off the ground and to see will they work. But you have to then fund those projects yourselves afterwards, after the initial grant aid is gone. Then, as I said, you have annual grants that are available to some organizations, like the HSC grants, the CSP grants, TUSLA grants, etc. And again, they're for a very specific type of projects. So the basic steps that we would focus on is research what grants are available for your type of project. Okay, so identify the type of work you do, the type of projects you're involved with, and research those grants that are available. Some people will just apply for every grant under the sun, which is a waste of time, your time, and it's a waste of people's time that are assessing the applications. It's a bit like a person kind of putting their CV in every job they see advertised, they put their CV into it, even if they're not qualified for that job. It's a waste of time, okay? You know, only go after grants that are relevant to your organization or project. It doesn't mean that you can't do something new or innovative, but don't, like if you're a youth organization or you're providing service for young people, there's no point in looking for funding for funds that are available for older people's projects or, you know, social housing or something like that, because it's completely irrelevant to you. Some grants that are out there, they might obviously be relevant to you, but you can look and see, well, maybe we can do something here that is linked to what we do on a day-to-day basis, and we possibly could get a grant for it. So small bit of innovation, thinking outside the box is okay as well, but don't go after grants that are not relevant to you, that you don't meet their criteria, because it's a waste of time. Know the deadlines and the criteria. This is something that should be straightforward because it's advertised and the deadlines are advertised. I've given up at this stage in terms of multiple people who contact me and say, Tom, you know, can you just hand there, we're applying for a grant. Yeah, okay, no problem at all, pass the grant. And tell me, I'm like, oh, you do realize the deadline's Friday? And they're like, yeah, and like today's Monday. And I say, look, sorry, there's not a hope you're going to have it ready in time for Friday. I say, actually, we'll put it in anyway. It's madness. Normally you're given probably a minimum of a month's notice, usually longer, to get the grant ready. Sometimes it can be shorter turnaround time, especially if the government have money they want to spend quickly, or you're coming up to the end of the year, they want to get applications in quickly. There might be very fast turnaround time. That's where the pre-planning work comes into it, because you'll have all the information ready to go at that time. So know the deadlines. Look at the criteria. The organizations that have the funding give very detailed, specific criteria as to what they will and what they won't fund. If you ignore that, it's crazy. That's like if you're trying to sell a product as a salesperson to a customer and you don't ask them any questions about what they want, you're not going to be able to sell them anything. Okay, if you know what the organization is funding or is providing grant wants, you know what their criteria is, you know what their focus is on, you can then make sure your project meets that criteria, meets that focus, and has a good chance of getting the funds. Look at the previous groups they've awarded. So have they set precedent? Have they funded projects like yours in the past? Okay, if they haven't, doesn't mean they won't fund you, but I'd always ask the question. So what we normally do is, if we're not too sure about the criteria, do we meet the criteria? Is our project relevant? Just pick up the phone or email and ask them. So this is what we're doing. Is this project eligible for funding under your scheme? Is it something that you would support? They either say yes or no, or they give you kind of a fudgy kind of grey answer back. But normally they kind of say yes, or they say maybe, or they'll say blankly, no, we won't be able to fund it, we won't be able to support it. You have to have the consultation done. You have to have needs analysis done. Okay. Anyone that says to me, Tom, we're looking to apply for a grant for a building or for a project, whatever it might be, I'd ask them, why are you doing it? And sometimes you get blank faces back at you thinking, well, it's just grant day, sure, and it's free money, and it's, you know, it'd be great to have it. That's not a reason to develop it. It has to be based on some sort of identified need. Okay. So our community center is too small. We're turning people away. We don't have space for the activities. It's too cold, there's damp, there's leaks in the roof. We've got lots of young people in the community. They've no place to play. There's no playground. The GA pitch is waterlogged. All these things. That's a reason to do something. It's based on some sort of needs analysis. If that's not done, and you're putting an application together, that means you're going to have to lie in the application form and make up some sort of rationale as to why this project should be funded. Okay. I'm not saying you do that and you should do that. Some groups do it. The problem is that they get the money, and then they realize, oh, we've got it now. What do we do with it? Sure, we don't really need it at all. And now we've got to come up with a project, and it creates problems. So only apply for funds that you actually need and as a proven need for it. Have all the necessary documentation on file. Okay, so I'll go through all that with you later on in terms of what documents are required for pretty much all grant applications. So like your legal documents, your policies and procedures, your quotations, planning if it's required, all those things. they need to be ready. Most of these documents are not easily found and quickly accessed when you need them. So if they're not on file and you don't know where they are, sometimes you won't be able to get the grant application in because you just don't have the documentation ready to go alongside it. For example, we got a call 2 weeks ago there's a grant that's come up on this Friday. It's the building blocks grant for childcare providers to do renovations to their buildings. The deadline's Friday. And we got a phone call from a group 2 weeks ago saying, will we give them a hand with the documentation? I said I would. Their project is over 50,000 euros. Because over 50,000 euros, they have to go to e-tenders to tender for the works. The minimum requirement for e-tenders in terms of notice is 21 days. So they won't meet the deadline because they won't have the tender won't be up for enough time period to get tenders back in time. And they need to have the tenders to see what the quotes are to put the application in on Friday. In normal circumstances, they could maybe get the tenders in, but as you know, you might know, if you talk to any construction worker or construction company or trades company or materials providers, even to get them to quote for work at the moment is impossible. So this won't meet the deadline because they won't have the documentation ready. And obviously the last thing is you complete the application form, submit all the technical and support documents required, and you hope for the best then after that in terms of the application's gone in. But this is all preliminary work that you do well in advance so that you're ready to pounce on the applications when the applications are opened up to the public. This is what a very, very simple template that we use. So if you've got a committee, whether it be your board of management or your executive committee, or if you've got a fundraising committee, or if you've got 2 people to do all the work in the organization, doesn't matter. Put together some sort of a kind of a planner for your grants. This is a very simple table. It's not very fancy. If you want to use project management software, do something a bit more complex, you can. But the key thing really here is that you're aware of what grants are coming up, what the deadlines are, and what's involved. So the name of the grant, so the title of the grant, where the grant is coming from, the contact person within the organization, if you have one, or at least the contact email that you can email for questions. What project is this grant going to go towards? So you might be working on many projects, or it might be just one project. So you identify where this money can go to. The deadline for the application, okay? There might also be, if it's an online application, there might be also an initial deadline to register on the online portal. So most grants are now online, and there's an online portal that you have to go into to complete the application. So if any of you are familiar with sports capital funding or public funding, you'll be familiar with their portals that they use online on their sites. And with some of these organizations, they have a deadline to register on that portal, okay? And that deadline normally would be a couple of weeks before the actual deadline for the grant. So if you miss the deadline to register, it means that you won't be registered on the site to be able to register or to apply and complete the application form online. Kind of make a bullet point list of what's required, so what information are you looking for on the application. Kind of put in again the actions that you need to do in terms of what work needs to be done to get the application ready, and then delegate responsibilities to key people to get that work done. And then again, put in the deadlines for that work to be done. So for example, we might be working on an application for grants for a GA club or a sports club, okay? So we put in here maybe the sports capital funding. The source is the Department of Sport, contact person in your local area in terms of the department that's covering your region. For what projects, so it might be, let's say, for redraining of a pitch, floodlights, or maybe building a clubhouse or something. We put in the deadline, date, what's required, planning permission, quotations, license agreements, bank statements, proof of ownership, all the technical details. We put in the actions, so who's going to organize the planning permission, who's going to get the deeds off of the solicitor, who's going to organize the bank statements, and we list the people who are going to be responsible for those things, and we give them deadlines to come back to us with that information. Okay, so it's really kind of everything's planned out, it's action planned, and it's deadlines given to it. Otherwise, you're in a situation where you're 2 weeks out, nothing's done, no one's responsible, and you just don't have the information ready to go in with the application, and you missed the deadline. Okay, it's all about just being prepared and being organized around it. We would always recommend that there's a fundraising committee or a team that's put together to support putting the application together. In some organizations, you might yourselves be coordinators or administrators that are responsible for this in your organization, and you're on your own doing it. That's okay if it's your full-time job and you're doing it. But if you're a volunteer and you've other things going on in your life, you need to have support to put these things together, because some grants are very straightforward, very little information is required, and the application process is very straightforward. Other grants then would be a bit more complex, where a lot of information is needed. Source of grant information. So sorry, that should be Carlow PPN. So again, on the PPN's website, in terms of news and information that's available, in terms of maybe grants that might be announced. Funding Point is a subscription site that you pay membership each year for, and that's updated regularly in terms of what grants and funds are available. Active Link is another site that you can go on to find out what grants are available currently. Some of them are localized to certain towns or certain counties or certain cities. Others are generic grants that are available to everyone across the country. And some are just not relevant to you at all. But you look at the ones that are relevant and you maybe look into a bit more information on them and see if there's something you should go for. And again, within your committees or teams, decide to go for it or not go for it. This is an online calendar for 2022, which is linked to funds that are available through the Rural Future strategy that the government came up with a number of years ago. So this is the rural development policy for Ireland, and under that policy, there's a number of initiatives the government wants to see supported, and they then put money into supporting those initiatives through various different grant packages. And those grants are available for review in terms of what funds are out there and the deadlines, etc., on this link here. This is just a screenshot of the Active Link website. So you can see very simply the type of grants that are available, and the deadlines. So again, the title of the grant, the region that's relevant to, so it's nationwide, the listed deadline when it's going to be the application is closed, and then the categories. So when you go into each any of these, it brings you into the criteria, the information about the grant, and further information, maybe some application guidelines, some background to the grant that's relevant to you. The Wheels website is where Funding Point is hosted, and again, subscription-based, membership-based. You're paying about 120 euros, I think, roughly for the year, so it's not that expensive. And you click on Funding Point, funding opportunities, and it brings you into something similar to this, where it's a database of all the funds that are available across the country at that particular time. Okay, again, some are relevant to you, some are not relevant to you. And again, normally there's a link there then to the various different sites or departments that have the criteria, the guidelines, etc., to read. Okay, so that's kind of what we do. We keep an eye on these things, and we make people aware of them. Any projects we're involved with on an ongoing basis, we can let them know that, look, there's a fund out there that might be relevant to you. Are you interested in going for it? These are some sample grants, just to give an idea of what's out there. There's obviously more than these. This is very, very kind of brief sample. So leader funding is kind of the go-to for a lot of organizations every year. So that's the Rural Development Programme, or the leader programme, that's administered by local development companies in each county. And each county has at least one local development company. The last program, the last year program finished 2 years ago, and they've been in kind of a, I suppose, what's the word, temporary funding kind of process for the last 2 years until the new program comes in. The new program is due to come in next year. There at the moment, the local development companies are tendering for the management of that program. And that program, the next leader program, will be in place for maybe, I think it's a 6-year program. So towards the end of next year, potentially towards the next year, they will have budgets in place and they will be open for new applications. Under the previous program, they were awarding up to 90% funding, up to 25,000 euros for feasibility projects, and 75% up to a maximum 250,000 euros for capital projects. We don't know what the criteria is going to be for the next program because that hasn't been done yet, but we are presuming that it'd be something similar to that going forward. The rumor all along has been that the next leader program would be very much focused on environment and green projects, and obviously with current energy crisis, and with the feedback from the what's called the environmental program that was there, the conference that was on there the last couple of days or last week. Everyone's focused on now reducing carbon emissions, reducing energy costs, looking at renewable and sustainable energy, and government policy is very much focused on that. So if government policy and European policy is focused on it, the funding is going to follow that policy. So it's important to look in terms of how maybe it's going to be relevant to yourselves in terms of your projects. Some of the other ones then would be Town and Village Renewal Scheme. They come up every year through the local authorities, again funding between 20 and 100,000 euros. Normally your local authority would put out an expression of interest for projects, and they would then pick a number of projects that they would support, and they would apply for funding for through the local authority. Outdoor Recreation and Infrastructure Scheme, the ORIS scheme, again is ministered to. Again, so you're looking at small scale projects up to 20,000 euros, medium scale projects up to 200,000 euros, and then large scale between 200 and 500,000 euros. So again, it's about keeping a link and keeping a contact and an open communication with your local authority and your development officers in the regions, covering the various different areas across the county. So your municipal officers are key within every local authority to be in contact with, that you're on their radar in terms of any supports funds that are out there. They'll contact you, let you know what's available, and they're your go-to person to see if your project is relevant or not before you start applying for it. On the larger scale funding, then you've got the Rural Regeneration Development Fund, or the RRDF, for towns up to 10,000 people, with a population of 10,000 people, and then the URDF, which is Urban Regeneration Development Fund, which is for larger towns across the country. That's the big capital funding that's available. They've got Category 2 funds, which are funding to get your project planning ready, so pre-development stage. So you might have an idea for a building project in your community, but it requires detailed analysis. It requires construction design, planning, permission, and all the reports to go along with that, plus a business case analysis as well before you're allowed to apply for the full funding. And then Category 1 is where you're actually looking at the development of the project, and that's for projects that are large scale, over 500,000 projects. So last week, the announcement was made for the RDF Category 1 projects. And we were looking to be involved in a project above in Durrow in County Laois. We did the business case analysis for them for a community enterprise centre, and they were awarded 1.25 million last week for their project. So they're large scale projects. They are open to rural areas of population less than 10,000, but the reality is they really only focus on rural towns. We've put in a couple of applications for villages and they've been turned down. Their focus really is on regenerating rural towns that are suffering from depopulation, vacancy, dereliction, unemployment, etc. You've got the Community Enhancement Programme, again, managed through local authority, and that's to support community amenities and facilities. So a lot of organisations will apply for that have got community centres, community parks, town parks, playgrounds, that sort of project. Community Sport Fund is similar, again, administered through the local authority. CLOR funding, again, for CLOR areas. Not sure in terms of how much of Carlow is under CLOR, but most counties have a large portion of their county will be under CLOR, which is basically rural disadvantaged areas. Some maybe pockets of Carlow in terms of towns mightn't be, but like Kerry or like any other county, large portions would be. Again, that funding would be available for community projects and facilities. PUBL have a range of programs. So PUBL are the government's kind of biggest kind of agency for administering lots of grants and grants programs. So if you go to PUBL's website, you can see what programs they fund, and again look at what programs might be relevant to you and what deadlines are there, when are those programs open for funding. Community Foundation grants, again, have a range of grants. Again, if you go into communityfoundation.ie, a list of all the grants that they have and which grants are closed and which grants are open would be on there. And again, Rethink Ireland also would have a number of grant packages and programs that they manage. I think it's Community Foundation or Rethink that manage the Toy Show appeal grants. So next Friday night's a toy show, and they raise a lot of money through that. And then next year they'll be putting out grant aid under the RT Toy Show appeal for organisations. And I think it's either one of the Community Foundation or Rethink that manage that grant process for them. So again, by being on their sites and keeping an eye on what they're doing, you'll see what grants are coming up that are relevant to you. And as I said, half the grants that might be advertised might be relevant, so there's no point in even worrying about them, but you want to make sure you're keeping an eye that you don't miss something that is relevant to you. So what to investigate when you're looking at any grants? The key thing, and this is where the advantage comes in terms of, if you're well prepared, you're going to have a lead on the other organizations that are applying also. So this is what I do in terms of, if I'm applying for a grant on behalf of an organization, and obviously it makes sense for me to make sure that grant is approved, or at least there's a very good chance, because if it's not, if every grant application I do gets turned down for funding, I won't be getting many phone calls down the line to do these things. So what I do as a professional, or what other very well organized, very successful voluntary organizations do, is they do the research. Okay, look at the eligibility criteria. What are the key words that they're looking for, that they're mentioning in the criteria that we can focus on in the application form? Okay, so they're always very specific in terms of the criteria, in terms of what they will support, what they won't fund, what they will fund, and they give examples of that. Okay, so you need to go through the criteria and say, okay, we're ticking all these boxes here. We need to say to them in our application form that we're ticking the boxes. Because you can imagine someone assessing an application form. They've got a specific set of criteria they're marking the application against. And in their head, they're assessing the application. This application has to be answering all the questions for them and ticking all the boxes for them as they're reading the application. Okay, so when they're reading it, they might think, yeah, this project is doing exactly what we want, is ticking all the boxes. If the application is kind of muddled and it's kind of all over the place and doesn't really make any sense, they're going to be struggling to kind of see how this application and this project actually meets the criteria and ticks any boxes. That's a problem for you. Okay, the golden rule I work out of is that the application form needs to answer every question that could possibly be asked by the person assessing the application. If it doesn't, they're not going to pick up the phone and ask for confirmation or clarification. They're just going to put it to one side and say, we put into the maybe file, or we put into the no, sorry, we're not interested file. Okay, look at the types of projects they fund. Look at the aims of the grant. Okay, why are they providing this funding? The funding that I mentioned there, this is coming out on Friday, the deadlines for Friday for works to be done to preschools and creches across the country, is all around retrofitting, and also looking at energy conservation, right? We all know why that grant is being made available, because organizations, whether they're voluntary or they're for-profit organizations, are struggling with energy costs. Okay, a lot of buildings that these preschools are in or creches are in are older buildings. They're not energy efficient. They're leaking heat. They need to be insulated properly, and you get grants for that sort of thing, and you get grants for solar panels. That's not coming out of the blue, that someone had a mad idea that this be good, something they should do. The aim of this grant is to look at trying to support organizations that are struggling because of the energy crisis and because of energy costs. Okay, that's the aim behind it. If you're writing an application, you've got to present the best case. The case being that our building is cold. We have to maintain a temperature of 21 degrees for our kids, where it's impossible given the condition of our building. You submit photographic evidence of leaks, of damp, of mold, of leaking windows, of single glazed windows, and you're trying to present the best possible case, saying, look, you're giving grants to projects that need to improve their energy performance, energy efficiency. We're showing you that we can't do this unless you give them money to do it. If you don't know why they're doing the grant, you're just going to start putting an application together, firing the application in, hoping that it's going to make sense to the people assessing it. Again, research the application process. Again, is it online, offline, the deadlines, the registration deadlines, if there's a registration deadline as well. Terms and conditions of the grant, very important to look what terms and conditions are after the grant is awarded. Okay, really important. A lot of people get grants and they give out like mad, that the bureaucracy and administration and the paperwork afterwards is onerous, and that if they knew that, they would never apply for the grant. I don't know how many times I met people and said, we're sorry we ever met you because you got us that grant, and it's caused us headaches since, because it's an absolute nightmare to deal with in terms of bureaucracy. That's the reality of it. Grant aid, drawn down public funds is bureaucratic. There's a lot of accountability, there's a lot of transparencies, a lot of boxes need to be ticked afterwards in terms of tax compliance, health and safety, insurance, proof of spending. All these things have to be done. Look at the terms and conditions and see if your organization is capable of meeting those terms and conditions pre-grant and post-grant. Look at the amount you can apply for. Again, this is something that baffles me. People don't ask what money is available. So they might need 100,000 euros for a project and the maximum grant available is 5,000 euros. That is a waste of time. That's like looking to buy a house that's $250,000 and the most that the bank's going to give you is 100,000 euros of mortgage. You know, there's no point. It'd be love to get it, but we can't get it. Or you might have a situation where, you know, you only need 5,000 euros and, you know, the grant is for a maximum of 100,000 euros. To be honest, if the grants are small, if there's only like 1,000 euros, a couple of thousand euros available in terms of grant date, I question, is it worth the hassle of putting the application in? Or just better off borrowing from the credit union and fundraising to pay off that loan over 2 years or something. It means you can get the project done quickly. You're not waiting for the project to be assessed. You're not doing any paperwork or bureaucracy, things like that. So some people might need money kind of pretty much straight away to do something they're going to get done and started pretty quickly. You know, most grant processes, there's a long lead-in time before the grant is actually, the deadline for the grant comes up, and then after it goes in, there's a lead-in time to be assessed, and then there's the contractual process you have to go through to draw down the grant. So you could be talking about, you know, in months, in some cases, to actually get the money, but your project might be starting next month. So again, look at the time frame of how long it takes to get the grant approved and how long it takes to get the grant drawn down. If that time frame is beyond the time you need to get the works done, then you have to look at alternative sources of funds for it. Again, timelines, as I said, which is that, look at the timelines after the grant application deadline, how long will it take to assess it, and when will it be announcing the winners of the process, and then when and how long it takes for the money to be drawn down afterwards. Look at the matching funding requirements. So is it a 90% grant, is it 70% grant, is it 50% grant? If it's only 50%, you're going to have to show, first of all, that you have the matching funds, the 50% in place in your bank. And secondly, you have to show that you've got access to the bridging funding. So that might be a loan agreement from the bank saying, yeah, we've offered in principle a loan to this organization as bridging finance. And part of that loan might be longer term loan that is part of the matching finance. So we would have gone through a process recently with my own club here in Tralee. We just did a €500,000 investment in a pitch. About 150,000 was grant aid, 100,000 was fundraised, and the rest was a loan through Cancredo. But we had to initial 150,000 euros of a loan to pay for the works that we were now drawing down the grant aid for. So all that had to be in place at the time we were applying for the grant. Supporting documentation that's required. So again, they'll give you a list of what documentation you need to submit with the application. They'll also probably give you a checklist with the application just to check that you have submitted the relevant documentation and it's all done properly. So in fairness to the agencies or the local development companies or the departments that are giving the funding, they want to make sure that every organization is given the criteria, and they want to make sure that every organization is completing the application form properly and that they submit the supporting documentation that's required. The reason to do that is that they don't want to be dealing with half-completed applications. They'll be dealing with applications that are not submitted with all the relevant documentation. But also, it's a very easy way for them to start cutting applications down, because all they can say is, well, you didn't submit the deeds, you didn't submit the bank statement, you didn't submit the quotations, you didn't submit the planning application reference number. So therefore, we couldn't assess your application. It's a brilliant way for them to save themselves time and hassle of assessing applications if the initial application requirements are met. And an awful lot of organizations that turn down because they haven't met the technical requirements. In other words, they haven't submitted the documentation that was requested. So their application form is not even looked at. Now that's very frustrating. You can spend months putting an application together and getting everything ready. And then because by accident or by by the fact you didn't have the information, you decided that, or you just forgot to put something in and it wasn't attached with the document or with the application turned down. That's very, very frustrating. And I've seen applications turned down because the date on a quotation was incorrect. I've seen applications turned down because the bank statement was submitted, the account name was a project name rather than the organization's name, and it was turned down. I've seen applications turned down because the architect that was working on the project gave the wrong planning reference number, because there's literally text over planning reference number to group. No one checked it, and the reference number went in, it was incorrect, and the application was turned down. There's an awful lot of reasons why applications turned down, and a lot of them are down to the fact that people are just careless in terms of what information they submit. And years ago, back when I started 20 years ago doing these things, you could do the old kind of Irish way of doing it. Should be grand. We'll just call someone, and our local councillor, he knows the fella inside the department, and we'll get him to go up and he'll sort out for us. And that did happen. I remember years ago, there was a minister for sport. I won't name them or name the county. And he was down his county for a weekend, and he said to the groups, I'll bring up the application forms to the department on Monday and I'll hand deliver them in myself before the deadline, and I'll put in a good word for you, which was fantastic. Everyone was delighted. But he bought all the applications up in the boot of his car, and he forgot to hand them in before the deadline for all the projects. No, that was back 20 years ago, I suppose. He went in and said, oh, sorry about that, I'd had him in late, and everything was fine. Because the deadlines are online, and because application forms are online now, if you miss a deadline, you can't go back in again because the portal is closed, the gate is closed, the shutters are down, there's no one at home, you can't get it in. So you have to make sure you're meeting a deadline. If you forget to submit something, you can't call them Monday morning and say, look, we submitted an application there on Friday. Geez, we're rushing it, we forgot to submit the planning details, we forgot to submit the lease, can we send in now? No, you can't. In some circumstances, they allow you maybe to send in further information afterwards, but the majority of cases they won't do it, because they want to reduce the amount of application they're assessing, and it's a good way of them for cutting it out. So why applications turned down? The fund is oversubscribed is the main reason. There's just too many people looking for a very small pot of money. They might have applications worth €1 million, and they might have funding for €500,000. It doesn't, just doesn't work out. It's like the loaves and fishes. It's just, this money's not there for it. The application or the project was not eligible, which to me doesn't make sense. Why would you submit an application that's not meeting the criteria? A lot of people do, because a lot of people think, we'll put it in anyway. We'll hope for the best. That's a waste of time. Grants were applications submitted beyond the deadline. A poor application. This is something that's causing problems in the last 12 months. You might be familiar with the various different COVID-related grant applications that were open over the last 2 years. Because there were what we call fast turnaround grants, and because there were emergency grant aid for organizations impacted by COVID, the application forms were very straightforward. Not a lot of information was looked for. Sometimes quotations weren't looked for. They allowed you to give a kind of a rough estimate of the costs, and we figure it out afterwards type of application, which is great because groups got lots of money. The problem is it created bad habits, and people now are kind of cutting corners in applications. That's a problem. The standard applications going in, and this is feedback I'm getting from local authorities and from local development companies, that the quality applications in the last 2 years have gone back a lot. There's a lot of people just submitting rubbish applications, very badly written, a lot of kind of like non-applicable filled in areas on the application form, or things like please see answer already given in section 1.2 of the application form. Lazy stuff. Okay, that's a disaster. You're not going to have a chance of getting funds if you put in a poor application. No consultation shown or no needs analysis provided. You might have a poor track record. This is something that causes groups a lot of problems. We always get asked the question, why are some organizations very good at getting money every year? The same organizations get funding time after time after time. That's because people like dealing with them, because they put in good applications. They're no problem dealing with them. They get the money drawn down. They're very good at doing administration. They're very good at paperwork. They're a good customer, they're a good person to deal with, good organization to deal with. They have a good track record, therefore they get supported. Other organizations get the grant aid. They're an absolute disaster to work with. They don't get the stuff back in time. They don't get the paperwork back in time. If they do, it's wrong. They're constantly being chased for quotations, constantly chased for bank statements, constantly be harassed for information back. And they just create a bad record within that organization, and they're not easy to deal with, And therefore, does the person who's going to be dealing with them want to deal with them? Probably not. They're not going to admit that, but it's human nature. If you're a public sector worker working in local authority, you're working in a government department, and you've got an organization or a basket case to deal with, and you've got an organization who are great to deal with, you're going to pick the organization that's great to deal with because they're going to make your life easier. And that's just human nature. That's the reality of it. So if you're an organization that has no record or no experience of putting an application in, doesn't mean you're not going to get funding. You've got a good chance of getting funding because you're going to be a clean slate. But if you are getting funding from organizations, make sure that you're doing everything they ask you to do on time, that's well prepared, it's well done, it's well organized, and the administration is done properly, because then you build a good reputation with that organization when you go back again looking for funding. In a lot of cases, the supporting documents are missing. They're not just attached. Again, no needs analysis provided, or the organization hasn't showed their capacity to fund the project. Again, I've seen letters being submitted by board saying, look, we don't have the match funds in place now, but we know we'll have it. We're doing a fundraiser in around 2 months' time, and we're very confident we'll make 20,000 euros. It has to be in the account. It has to be there, either in the account on a bank statement or a loan approval from the bank. Years ago, a letter from the bank manager saying they're a fantastic group. If they apply for a loan, we'll have no hesitation to give them a loan. That used to work. That used to work years ago. I remember going into myself to banks and getting the letters handed to me from the bank manager on behalf of a group and submitting with the application. That day is gone. You now have to have the loan approved with all the details of the loan in there, the term, the interest rate, the repayments every month has to be in with the application, and very often has to be stamped on a template that's been completed by the bank. So they're not going to take a chance that you might have the funds in place. You have to have the funds in place. The reason being is that if you don't have the matching funds in place, you can't draw down the grant. You can't get the work done. They're now going to draw that grant back off you. The last thing a government department wants to do, or a local authority wants to do, is to try to get the grant back off the organization, because they're not able to fulfill their obligations. So they want to make sure before they give the grant, they have the funding in place. This is an evaluation template that's used by leader local development companies that are assessing leader applications, and most grant agencies will have a similar scoring sheet. More often than not, they'll give you the criteria, they give you the weighting, and they give you the kind of the how they're going to score the application. That's because under freedom of information, they have to give you some sort of feedback on your application, and they want to make sure that people are aware that this is a very transparent, open, accountable scoring system. Okay, so they'll score you on the various different reasons. So in this case, it's compatibility with local strategy. So if your project doesn't meet the local development strategy or the local county council's development plan or county plan, it's not going to be scored very, very highly. So obviously you need to know what's in their strategy, you need to know what's in the town development plan, and how your project meets the strategy and how it's compatible with it, so you can try to get high scores. Is your project innovative? Is the organization that's running the project, delivering the project, what's their experience? Have they got a good track record? So we always focus on your experience of managing public funds. So if you're applying for public funds, which most grants are, very first thing to show is that our organization is well structured, is well managed, is well governed, and we've got a lot of experience in managing public funding. Straight out say to them, show your strengths as an organization, show your track record in managing similar projects in the past. Your financial viability. Do you remember at the start we're talking about the source of funding? They want to see that your project is financially viable, but more so that your organization is financially viable. Okay, that you've got a capacity to fundraise, you've other sources of income coming in, you're able to manage the funds, that you've got good financial management procedures in place, that you've got good accountability and transparency systems in place, that you've got a company accountant or someone's looking after and overseeing your financials, that you're regulated by the charities regulator, etc. Okay, so you're just basically trying to prove to them we're a good person to the organization to back because we have all these things in place. We're well organized, we're well managed, we're well governed, and we're compatible and compliant with, we're compliant with all the regulations, with all legislation. That's giving them the confidence in that they should give you the funding. Whereas another organization literally is all over the place. They don't have any proper policy and procedures. They're not regulated properly. They don't have proper accounts. They don't have proper treasurer's report. They don't have minutes of meetings. They have nothing. They're not considered a viable project, and they're considered not to be sustainable, because the day of organizations not organized, being organized properly, not being governed properly is gone. There's so much regulation now. There's so much bureaucracy now that you have to have an organization that knows what it's doing. The requirements. So again, does the project meet specific needs or address a specific gap in the market? In other words, have they proven to us in this application form that this project is actually needed? And how have they proven to us? Have they done a needs analysis? Have they done a public consultation process? Have they done a survey? Have they provided us any sort of detailed information that's required that we can see, yeah, they've proven to us that they need this project? But you can see the higher marks here. The higher weighting is for compatibility with local development strategy, the promoter's background and experience, and the viability. Okay, they only want to fund projects that meet their criteria, that meet their aims, and they only want to fund projects that are going to be delivered by organizations who are capable of delivering the project. Okay, that's really, really important. So you have to make sure in your application form, no matter how little information they look for, you get across those points that we're ticking the boxes here for you guys, and we're the organization that can deliver this on the ground for you. Okay, we always put into applications things like, we go back to, let's say, government policy. So for years on, say, sports projects, we were saying to sports clubs, for example, like a GA club, soccer club, rugby club, whatever, we were saying to them, look, government policy is about how they can increase participation in sport by people who are not participating in sport. Okay, so kids from disadvantaged areas, disadvantaged backgrounds, people with disabilities, and young women that are between the ages of, say, 14 and 20, going out of sport, not participating in sport. And government policy is about increasing participation. Okay, so we will put in an application. We're adding 2 dressing rooms to the clubhouse because we're trying to build the girls and ladies football within our club. We've recruited mentors, female mentors, coaches to work with our girls teams and ladies teams. We're working with the local girls schools. We're working with local community groups that are targeting girls from disadvantaged backgrounds and seeing, can we get them involved in sport? But for us to be able to do that, we have to build additional dressing rooms, and that's why we're building these dressing rooms. So the dressing rooms become a catalyst for getting girls involved alongside the other supports. So what they're saying to the government is, your policy is to increase participation. Give us the money, we'll increase participation. So straight away they can say, this is linked to our strategy. These guys are compatible with our strategy. And then you show them this sort of capacity to develop and deliver this on the ground based on our track record. Okay. You can nearly, not guarantee, but you can say this group has a really good opportunity to get this thing off the ground, and a really good opportunity to for us to tick our boxes as a government department and meet policy. Okay, because all the government do is provide funding to communities across the country to do the work that they should be doing anyway. Okay, so most work that's done within communities on the ground in Ireland, as you know better than anyone else, is done by the community voluntary sector. Okay, your Meals on Wheels, your community childcare, the voluntary coaching goes on in every sports organization, sports club across the country. It's all by volunteers. You know, your volunteers that work in cancer support organizations, your volunteers that carry people to daycare, your volunteers that go in and they support daycare groups that are providing service for older people, your volunteers who are out in the all weather picking up litter, weeding flower beds, you know, painting walls for tidy towns. They're all volunteers. That's, in other countries, that's work that's done by the public sector. In Ireland, the community voluntary sector step in. Okay, so they provide funding for organizations to provide these services. And all you're trying to say to them is, we're the best organization to deliver those services for you on the ground. Okay, so you give them the opportunity to weigh to score you highly, and especially in those areas where the weightings are high. Okay, now this is just one for leader. Other organizations have their own assessment, but if you can get your hands on their assessment criteria, you can now make sure that you're ticking all these boxes and ticking them fairly high. Okay, an organization who isn't aware of this will just write the application and they're praying that their project ticks the boxes. If you know what the boxes are, start ticking them before you actually put the application in. Okay, very important. There's a couple of questions there in chat, I think, is there? Also people leaving, that's fine.
Okay, Tom, yeah, I just had a quick look. A couple of people have had to leave, but we'll send everybody the recording anyway.
That's fine. Perfect, okay.
Don't take a little break, Tom, for 2 minutes.
Yeah, if there's any questions on what we've covered so far from anyone?
Can I make a comment, Tom, if that's okay with everybody?
Yep.
I don't know how much experience people have in the group have of making applications, but I want to just say that a lot of what Tom is saying in relation to groups applying for grants, the preparation is everything.
Absolutely. Yep.
It's absolutely everything. If you are not ready and if you haven't given yourselves the time, a long time, more than you can even imagine, to prepare your ideas about what it is you'd like to do, because you can't apply for a grant in response to something being announced. You have to know in advance what kind of plans you have, and that's about your strategy. And as Tom said, about linking into what's happening in your local community in terms of grants that are going to be available. Now they do change, but the core piece about the strategies you're trying to link in with is giving you the capacity. So have projects, we always say to groups, have projects in your back pocket that you're thinking of doing, have the groundwork done, have your supporting documentation ready, have the people ready in your committee that are going to work. This can't just be down to one person. The days of, I think Tom was saying, lobbing in an application and saying we'll send it on after and all that kind of thing, those days are long over. I suppose what we're seeing more of, and maybe Tom, you'd agree with this as well, is that there's more professionalism now required in terms of making applications and in the preparation that's going to be required. Like we would know of groups around the county who give everybody a headache when grants are announced because they're not ready. It's not up to the funder to keep chasing people to produce what's required. It's up to each group, and that's where things fall down. So it's something we're looking at doing, is preparing some documentation and putting together supporting, what am I trying to say? In the PPN next year, we're planning on putting together a file of documentation and resources for groups around making applications. So it's going to be a long-term project, but I think it'd be very, very useful.
Absolutely. Just on that there, Trish, actually as well, and you made a good point about getting very professional, where a lot of groups think that they need to hire in consultants. Yeah. And I'm a consultant. The last thing you want to be doing is hiring in consultants to be doing your grant applications for you, because it's like you have to get the experience of doing the applications yourselves. It is practice a lot of times. So where you bring the professional element into it is this, in terms of we advise groups, if they look at the structures, is to set up a fundraising team. And a fundraising team is looking at all elements of fundraising or sponsorship or partner opportunities and grant aid, and to identify someone in your local village or town or wherever that has some business skills or marketing skills, that has financial skills, like a retired accountant or an accountant that's still working but wants to volunteer, or someone with legal skills, and you get them on board your team, and you say to them, okay, you're not gonna have to go stand outside the church collecting or backpack. We just want your expertise here. We want you to provide that kind of professionalism on our committee. So in our local, the sports club I'm involved with, the soccer club I'm involved with, and I got involved in because my kids started playing soccer and I started getting involved in coaching. And because we're doing this large scale grant aid for their pitch, they knew also what I did, and they asked me what I do on a voluntary basis. I said I would, and I said, look, you need to put together a fundraising team, because there's going to be more than just the grant application. There's going to be a loan, there's going to be a lot of fundraising done over the next 10 years for this, and we need to bring a lot of sponsors and partners on board. So we identified through the club, through the parents of the kids, a solicitor, an accountant, a financial manager, and someone works in HR, and there's myself also. And then we got in the academy manager for the club as well, as the kind of club link as such, right? Now we're all involved in the club in terms of our kids are playing in the club, so they're all offered to do their time on a voluntary basis, right? So that time is 45-minute Zoom call every 2 weeks, and then not every 2 weeks, but every 2 weeks until that piece of work is done, and then we have a net now since probably 3 months ago, okay? But the key thing is that I have a role, they have a role to play, and it's their contribution to the club, okay? And what they're doing is they're using so it comes to sponsorship, they're using their connections in their businesses. So I'm using my connections in my business, they're using their connection in their businesses. And we've all said that we'll identify 10 companies to give us €500 a year to put our sign on the side of the pitch every year for 3 years, and we'll go back 3 years' time and renegotiate with them. Our target is 60 companies at €500 a piece that bring in €30,000 a year, which is our loan repayment to make. But there's only 4 of us that would be bringing that money through our contacts. So the professionalism doesn't have to be bought in professionals. It can be people in your community that are well capable, that might want to get involved because I think we're going to lots of meetings, we're going to lots of fundraising. All you want is their expertise or their knowledge or their skills, really. So it's really important. So the professionalism is important, but doesn't have to be bought in consultants or outside professionals to do for you, because you do need to build up the skills and experience in house yourselves, because these things come up regularly, and if you're capable of doing it, you'd be ready the whole time to get these applications in, because most application forms are the same. They look for the same information, the same layout, the same content, really roughly is required. If you have everything ready, you can actually, get these applications out relatively very quickly, because you have all the information put together for the previous ones. Okay, so it's important. Any other questions in relation to that? No? I
suppose, Tom, just to concur with you again there about the sustainability of the organization, the long-term view. If your organization is not strong, and if you don't have a strong committee or a strong board of management, you're going to fall at the first hurdle. So that's where we're referring to, as Tom said, the professionalism of how you're set up. Also, just doing basic things in the background, like doing your charities regulator training if you're fundraising. You need to have those things in place as well, and they will stand to you as part of your application, because you'll be ticking those boxes saying that you're compliant. So, okay, do you want to take a little break, Tom, maybe just for 2 minutes?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. If you want to back in, what time? So
it's just 1:30, so we come back in 5 minutes, 7 minutes.
Back in 5 minutes, so fine. Yeah, perfect.
Yep, get a quick cup of tea, everybody, throw on the kettle. See you back here.
Very good.
Sorry, Tom, thanks very much. I'll see you in a few minutes. Thanks, everybody.
Okay, yeah.
Cheers. We'll be finishing in the next hour, Tom, I presume, will we?
Yeah, we finished by half time. Yeah.
Super. Thanks very much. If anybody has any questions, just stick your hand up or pop it in the chat, and we'll deal with them as they come up, or at the end, whichever you prefer. Thanks, Tom.
Thanks, Rich. Okay, so the documentation is required. No, again, some applications don't require all this documentation. They do give a list of documents they do require on the application criteria. But as Trish said earlier, have these on file anyway, have them ready, just have them available, wherever you're going to be working from or working from home or whatever it is, have them available, not just in paper format, but in digital format. So if you've got, say, like your deeds, or you got your constitution or your members and articles association, whatever, in hard copy format that you got from the accountant or your solicitor, scan them, digitalize them, and have them as available as PDF documents. Because with the online applications, obviously all the documentation has to be submitted online via kind of PDF digital files. So, I've seen groups literally, scan their company accounts like 10 minutes before deadline because they didn't have them on file and on their hard drive. And just things that really they're not good for the heart if you're like last minute doing things. So just be organized, have things ready. So the couple things we would look at in terms of every organization should have these things done anyway. Okay, whether you're looking for funding or not looking for funding, in terms of your organization, in terms of good organizations have some sort of a plan in place. It doesn't have to be detailed 40-page document of a plan, but it's got some sort of a plan in terms of what it's going to do, how it's going to do it, and why it's doing it. So a strategic plan, a business plan, or you might have a feasibility study completed on a specific project. For larger scale projects, like the large capital projects I mentioned earlier, they're not going to give you grant aid unless you've done a feasibility analysis. So if you're looking for any sort of funding for, say, building projects or things like that, you have to have a feasibility study done to show the rationale behind the project and to show that the project is feasible or viable or sustainable. So for the very large projects we work on, the RDF, URDF projects, applications, you have to present like a 10-year financial projections and cost benefits analysis and economic impact analysis and all that kind of stuff. For the smaller ones, obviously you don't have to do them, but it's important that you have some sort of strategic plan or a business plan for your organization anyway. And within that, you're showing the funder, we've done our needs analysis that gives us the rationale for doing this work in the first place. We have, our objectives, what they are, make sure those objectives link back to the objectives of the fund. The strategic context, I'll talk about that in a second, because this is important. This is where your project is aligned to national policy or local policy. So what's the strategic context within why you're developing this project? The operational model, so how your organization is run. So your structure, so your board of management, your volunteer structure, your committee structure, your staffing structure if you have staff. Some groups might have, some groups don't have. If you don't have staff, it doesn't matter. Your volunteers are your staff. You still need some sort of structure for them. Financial viability then is looking at your annual budget and how you finance that budget every year through your fundraising strategy, through your fees, through your sponsorship programs, however you're bringing money in. Okay, and again, this might seem like over the top for, let's say, a small organization that's working, doing small projects in a local community, but it's done on a small scale, but it's still done. If your budget's only €1,000 for a year to do whatever you need to do, it's still €1,000 you got to find somewhere. So you still have a treasurer's report, so what money is spent, what money is coming in. It's the exact same thing you'd be doing if your budget was €1 million. It's the same concept, money in, money out. So you have to make sure it's viable and that you can afford to do it. And then a big part of any project is the impact. Again, some groups don't look at this until they're asked to, they're asked by funder, what's the impact of this fund? What's the impact of this project if you do it? But regardless of funding, you need to be sitting down as an organization and saying, okay, well, what is the impact we do here? What is the impact of our work? And how can we document that impact? Okay, so a lot of groups come back to us. Let's say if we're working with an example of a group we're doing work with at the moment, a respite group, Care Respite Care, to provide respite services and carers for people within the community. And they're funded as a CSP, Community Services Project, or a social enterprise project. And they always focus on the impact of the amount of people they're providing care for. So the number of clients they have that are providing care for on a daily basis or on a kind of an ad hoc basis every week. Okay, so these carers go into people's houses that are older relatives or people with disabilities that need support and care, and it gives respite to their carers for a couple of hours or a day or a night or whatever it might be. So they're always focused on the impact in terms of numbers of clients. But we said, but there's more of that. There's more of an impact there. There's an impact on the people you're providing respite for as well. So the child, the son, daughter, the husband or wife, or the sibling or whoever it is that's looking after this person, they're getting some respite. It allows them to get some free time. That's an impact. So multiply the amount of people that are benefiting that way. There's also an impact in your local community in terms of that person that's getting respite can actually go and get a part-time job or go and do further education or can do the shopping in the local community. So that's a local economic impact. And then there's impact in terms of the savings that you're making given the state. So let's say it's costing, I don't know what the figures are at the moment, but let's say it's costing €1,000 a day to keep someone in hospital care or in a hospital bed or a nursing home bed. By providing a carer into that person's home, they're allowed to stay at home, they're able to stay at home. That's a massive saving annually to the government, to the national budget. And you see that's the impact of it. So it's how everyone knows that they have an impact on what the work to do has an impact on their community, but we don't document it. And you need to start documenting that so you can start telling people what the impact is. Because you're always going to presume, and it's only presumption, that the person sitting on, I remember years ago working in the north side of Dublin in places like Coolock and Darndale and Kilbarrack and places like that. So like a place like Darndale, which would be huge issues in terms of social problems, massive unemployment rates, but a brilliant community, but just has always got the negative, bad publicity the whole time. And we were saying, I always say to the people in Darndale that you're working with, look, you got to presume that the person who's assessing your grant application is from Dublin 4, right, who has never experienced disadvantage in their entire life, who have no idea what it's like to be unemployed, or they've never seen any member of their family unemployed, and they don't know any sort of hardship. Now that's a presumption. And you need to spell it out to them and paint a picture for them on the application form as to why they should support your project. The same way that if a government department, civil servant who's based above in Dublin is looking at an assessment of an application from someone that's based down in Portmagee down in South Kerry, they might have no idea where Portmagee is, let alone what issues are impacting them down there. So you've got to spell it out for them. We know in our communities, in your communities, in your villages, what the problems are. You know what the issues are. You know what the impact of the work you do is on the ground, but you need to tell people who have no idea about you or no idea about your parish or your village what those problems are. So you have to document for them. And that's where volunteers, struggle because they will, sure, it's obvious, but the real problems are, but it's not obvious to people assessing it because they're not from the local area. So things like your annual report, again, that you should have anyway. You know, the amount of annual reports that are written the day before deadline for a grant is nuts. Like, you know, we don't have an annual report, better write one because we have one in place. You should have an annual report every year that's documenting what you're doing anyway. If you're regulated by a chartered regulator, you have to have your report every year anyway, so it's something you need to do. Your annual accounts, if you're a company limited by guarantee, something you might be, you're going to have to set annual accounts prepared by your company accountant. That's going to be done. Those accounts are submitted to CRO and to the revenue, so you will have them. It's not a case of will I, won't I, you have to have them. If you've only got a constituted group, you're not a company, you would have an annual treasury report or an annual financial report and an annual income and expenditure report at a very, very minimum, okay? You'll have a constitution, or if you're a company, you'll have a Members and Articles Association. Again, you'll have these. Who has them? Where are they filed? Where do we leave them last? Who's got them? Joe has them. Joe's in Barcelona for 2 weeks. Where is Joe? How are we going to get Joe? How can we contact Joe? We missed the deadline. You know, kind of turning up and saying, we don't have them, we'll put them in afterwards. You can't do that. They have to be there. Some people, they think it's a good idea to have these things held on file by their company accountant or their company solicitor. Nothing wrong with company accountants and solicitors. They're not going to prioritize ye if they're under pressure at work and you ring them at 10 minutes to deadline saying, geez, can you please email our constitution because we don't have it. Okay, have everything that belong to you on file somewhere. Yes, they can have copies of it, but you need to have copies of it on file. Your quotations, and I'll talk about this in a second, in terms of the number of quotations you need. Planning details. This is important that you look at the criteria. Some applications will look for projects that have planning permission, and you have to have planning permission in place. Okay, if you don't have planning permission received and approved, you're not able to apply for funds. Other projects will allow you to submit the application on the basis that you're going to go through a planning process. And other applications will say that if you don't require planning, you need to tick the box saying planning permission not required, but you need to back that up with a letter from your local authority, the local planners, or from a suitably qualified engineer or architect. Okay, so that needs to be in place. So look at what the requirements are in relation to planning. Sometimes they look for a planning reference number only and not the actual full planning file, but they look for planning reference number. As I said earlier, make sure if you get a planning reference number from an architect, check it on the planning file to make sure it actually is your project. Don't rely on other people to give information. Check that information is correct when you're doing it. Technical documents, things like drawings, a bit of quantities, any surveys that were carried out, anything they look for to back up the application. This application on Friday that's going in for the building blocks project, they need to see a BER, building energy rating survey attached with the application, or an engineer's report attached with the application. If you contact an engineer today, let's say it's Tuesday, and say I need the engineer's report done by Friday, you're not going to get it. Okay, so don't wait to have these things done. Proof of consultation. You know, if you put in the application form, this project was identified through a needs analysis done with the community, through public survey, and through a public meeting. It was also included as a strategy under our community plan that we completed last year. If they don't ask for the documents to back that up in the application form or on the application portal, put in, we have no problem, or put in something that we can send on copies of the community plan or copies of the consultation process and the detailed analysis if requested. Okay, that's just showing them you have it. Because very easy something to lie, saying, oh yeah, we did a community consultation process there last year and we loads of people turned up to the meeting. They won't know that. They will, and if they don't look for proof of it, they'll just take your word for it. But if you put in something that we can attach it, or look at a website where we have a link to the public consultation analysis done, that's giving them proof, and they're saying, yeah, these guys have done the consultation. They're not just making up on the application form. So you're trying to get that angle over the next organization. Give them information. If they want to look at it, it's there. If they don't want to, that's fine, but you give them the opportunity to look up that information. Tax clearance. Some applications will say that at the time of contracts being agreed or the time of drawdown, you have to prove that you're tax compliant. Every organization should have a tax reference number and a tax access number. If you don't know what they are, contact your accountant, if you have an accountant, or contact revenue. Your base year tax reference number is your tax number for your organization. So your tax reference number is your tax number with revenue, and your tax access number is the access number that anyone can go into Revenue Online Services to see if your organization is tax compliant. In other words, if you've got tax clearance. Okay, you will not get public funding if you're not tax compliant, because the money you're getting is from taxpayers' money. So it'd be kind of ironic if they started giving out taxpayers' money to organizations who aren't tax compliant. Every community voluntary organization should be, because you're not like a private company doing tax returns every month and all this stuff, but you need to have tax access. Again, if you don't know where it is and you're a day out from the deadline and you have no idea how to get it, don't leave it that late. Have it on file somewhere that all you need to do is cut and paste it into the application form. Policies and procedures. Okay, some people say if they don't request it, we don't have to have them. If you're regulated by a chartered regulator, you won't have to have and comply with lots of policies and procedures within your organization. Health and safety, employment law, equality law, succession planning, risk management, all these ones in the spot they might look for. It's something your organization should have anyway. If you do, have them there. They might ask for them in the application form in terms of you submit them. They might ask you, have you the following policy and procedures in place if we look for them? Typically they say that these should be on file if ever we need to see them. But that basically means if they ever decide to audit you as a department and they pick your organization and pick your project and pick your grant as being the one they want to audit, all the information you said was available on the application form has to be on file for them to view and see. Okay, so a lot of people say, will they say we have a policy and procedure? They never know. And then they get picked for an audit, and then it's worrying. Let's say that. So you should have these things in place anyway. There is tons of templates online for sample policy and procedures that you can look at. You can use as a basis for your own policies and procedures. Some are standard policy and procedures that everyone has to have, and a standard wording, so you don't have to rewrite them all, but have them in place and have them on file. Your insurance. Again, think about it. If you get grant aid for a building or grant aid for a piece of equipment or machinery, something like that, or whatever it might be, if your building goes up in fire or is flooded and all that equipment is damaged and the building that you got grant aid for is damaged, they want to make sure that that building is insured, because they will be looking to claw their money back. Okay, because they have a charge in that building, they have a claim on that building as such because they funded part of it. Again, it's something your organization should have in place. They won't normally look for details of the policy. They'll ask you to submit a declaration that you're fully insured. Okay, once you tick that box, if you're not, and there's issues on the line, you've now given fraudulent information saying you are compliant, you were insured at the time, and if you're not, that's going to cause problems. Don't just tick box and say, oh yeah, we have all these things in place, and then be delighted with yourselves because you got away with it. That normally comes back to haunt and bite people afterwards. So these are kind of standard documentation that most of this stuff you should have in place anyway, if you're being well organized, well managed, and others then would be information that's relevant to that project, like planning, like drawings, like surveys, like quotations that you have for that specific project. But 90% of the information that's sought by every funder is standard generic information you should have on file. One of the things that people get caught up on, and it takes time, is every application will ask you detail any previous grants you received in the last 3 years. Okay, and you're given a box like this or a table like this where it says the grant, the source of the grant, the date it was received, and the amount that was funded. Okay, it's standard pretty much on every application. Organizations know that they got funding. They can kind of think of the amount of funding they got. They probably are aware of where they got the funding from. The date they got the funding, they have no idea. They can't remember. And what they got the funding for, they can't remember either. Every time you get a grant, this is a simple Excel or template or Word table document, or you can use old-fashioned diary if you want, or whatever you need to use. Every time you get a grant from anyone, write down the grant, the source of the grant, the date it was received, the purpose of the grant, the amount that was received, what percentage of the project was given to you. So if it's 50% or 25%, 75%. The contact person that was dealing with the grant in the organization, was it fully drawn down, and the money that you provided matched with it. Okay, this will take you all of 5 minutes to complete once you get the grant. If you get a grant, it takes you 5 minutes to complete this, and you keep this record, right? This record will be used for your accountant when you're doing your company returns, because they have to submit the grants on your company accounts, what was granted, and a detail of all the grants. Okay, so you literally email this over to them, 10 seconds job. If you're doing your annual report, you put on your annual report the fund you received in the year. You cut and paste this table into that document, maybe doll it up if you want to, but it's a 5-second job. And when you're then submitting this information in your grant application, you're literally cutting and pasting or transferring from this table into the application form. As opposed to spending an hour finding the bank statements, then 5 hours going through them, trying to find out what was the grant, then trying to go back through emails, find out where the grant came from. This takes time. Bit of organization, bit of work at the start, bit of work just documenting as you go along saves you so much time and effort down the line. Everything's at your fingertips then in terms of information that you might need. And again, this is, you don't need to be an IT wizard to do these things. If you don't use Excel or Word or anything like that, pen and paper is fine as well. Just have a record of everything that you get it when you get it. Needs analysis. There's not one grant application I can think of that you don't have to provide some information as to why you're applying for the funding. Okay, there is none. There is no application out there that doesn't ask the question: have you done a needs analysis? Why is this fund needed? How you recognise the need for this project? So, what are you applying for? How do you identify the need? What research have you done on the project? What will the impact of the project be? Will the project cause displacement? Okay, very important to ask that question also. Is this project going to cause displacement? Displacement basically means that if they granted your project, is there other projects like it nearby? Okay, in other words, is there duplication there, or is it going to displace another group? So, for example, if I do voluntary work with 2 cancer support groups in Kerry, one is Recovery Haven, and they provide counselling supports and listening supports for patients who are going through cancer treatment or come out the other side of cancer treatment or who've been diagnosed with cancer. And then I provide some supports for Kerry Cancer Support Group, and they provide the Cork-Kerry link bus. So they bring people from Kerry to Cork every day for treatment, every day. And it's for a free service they provide. Both of them are providing supports and services to cancer patients in Kerry, okay? But they're not displacing each other, they're complementing each other. Okay, so instead of saying that, oh, but there's another organization doing that, they're not. Yes, they're providing supports for cancer patients, but they're not providing the same supports. They're providing complementary supports, and they actually work together. Okay, so you got to show, if we could put a funding project in, are we actually displacing another project locally, or we're duplicating another project locally? You know, the day is gone of every club in the town looking to build an AstroTurf pitch, you know. And you've got these Astro pitches dotted all over the place, right? That are not sustainable. Now the government are focused on multi-purpose, multi-use facilities. Schools use them, clubs use them. So instead of having 5 Astros, they have like one large that are used by everyone in the community. That stops duplication, okay? And it stops displacement. How we sustain a project? Again, so a question we ask groups when we're working with them is, if they're looking for funding and they've identified the need for the project because there's people requiring that service or facility or whatever in their community, we would ask them the question afterwards: how are they going to sustain it? Not just purely from a financial point of view, but will people still need it and still use it? So last week we were above in a village in West Limerick, and they're looking to convert part of an old parochial house and extend it into a creche and preschool. And I said, why is there need for it? They said, well, there's at least 12 babies in the community that we've no place for them. They have to go miles to a creche and preschool. I said, that's fantastic. Yeah, there's a need for that. When those kids go to national school, though, they're gone from the creche. They're in no national school. How many babies will be born in the next 5 years to sustain that building? I said, we no idea. I said, that's the problem. You don't know. How many families move to the area? As it works out, they can't get planning permission to build houses in the area because of percolation. So very few people are moving to the area to live there because they can't build. If families are moving to the area, they're going to run out of babies to sustain the project. Okay, so very practically looking in terms of, yeah, get €1 million to build it, and then in 5 years' time thinking, okay, we've got €1 million creche here, but we know when to use it. We now need to convert it into a working space or something, right? So it's how you sustain a project afterwards. You don't have to go into great detail on this on an application form, okay? Because you won't be allowed that much information, allowed that much space for this information. You just reference it. We've done the needs analysis. We've identified what's needed, why it's needed. It's not duplicating anything. It's not causing displacement. And we sat down as a group and we looked at how we can sustain this project. It's wording on paper, but that's all they need to hear. They say, okay, this group have thought this through, okay? And then how much do you need in terms of how much money do you need to actually get this project off the ground? In some cases, the needs that are in a community, the fund that's available, just won't even go near meeting their requirements. There's no point in going for it then. We were dealing with a group at the moment. They're trying to convert an old building. It's going to cost them 750,000 euros to convert the building and renovate the building. There is no way they're going to get that much money. So they have to kind of cut back their expectations in terms of what they can actually provide their community, and look at it doing it on a phase basis. So sometimes you've got to be realistic about it as well, because the assessors will look at this from a real perspective, and they say there's no way they can sustain this. There's no way they'll get this thing done. It's a small community, it's a small population. We don't agree with it. So you must make sure that you're putting your best case forward, but you're being realistic about it as well. For large scale projects, the large capital projects I mentioned, you have to do detailed needs analysis, and that's be put into a feasibility study and a feasibility analysis. For smaller scale projects, that's not required, but you should have some sort of element of analysis done anyway before you actually approach it. The structure, like anything, if someone's giving you money, if it's a bank giving a business a loan, if it's someone giving you money as a personal loan, they need to trust you, and they need to make sure you're going to pay it back, or at least you're going to spend the money wisely. Okay, the exact same thing when it comes to the not-for-profit sector, community voluntary organizations with public funds. Okay, the government, whether it be through the government departments, local development companies, local authorities, the last thing they need is to give money out to groups who spend the money incorrectly, or they do something wrong to money, or there's going to be negative PR associated with them. They don't want to deal with it. They want to deal with a squeaky clean organization who are run effectively, well managed, well governed. Okay. The charges regulator that you're all familiar with, somebody gone through the process, somebody might be going through the process, someone might be planning to go through the process. It is onerous, the process to apply. The reporting process is onerous as well. However, it does provide you with I kind of call it body armor to go out there saying that we're compliant here. And we're not just saying it, the regulator's saying it. The agencies, the local authorities, the government departments giving them money, they will use the regulator as being the watchdog. Okay. If the regulator is okay with it, we're okay with it. Up until the regulator and charge regulator was formed and all the regulations came in, they were relying on company accountants to be the watchdog of the companies because they were signing off on company accounts. That was fine when it was companies, but you're dealing with groups who aren't legal entities, who are constituted groups, they're local community organizations with a constitution. There was no watchdog. The treasurer was stating, the committee was stating what was and what wasn't, and they had to trust them because there was no one regulating them. There was no one overseeing it. So therefore, it was more difficult. If you were looking for large scale funding, you had to be a company limited by guarantee to get the funds, because that level of scrutiny and that regulation was there based on the fact it was a company. It wasn't there if you're just a normal constituted group. I think personally that going forward, the only funds would be made available to organizations are organizations that are regulated by the regulator. Okay, because it gives then peace of mind to the funders that, look, they've been regulated by someone else. We don't have to worry about it, kind of, because we have to worry about it, but not to the point where we're hoping that they'll spend this money correctly. So the key thing for yourselves is if you don't have a good structure in place at the moment, okay, and a lot of organizations have a structure in place, but it's not an effective structure. And the structure is, there's people that are very good-willed, their heart's in the right place, they do an awful lot of work for the community, they've been probably volunteering for many years, but everyone's relying on that handful of people. There's no succession planning there. There's no new people come on board. There's no, there's the structure's there in theory, but it's not a very good, well-managed structure. I'm just thinking this is going to generic. We would see this across the country where we're dealing with brilliant organizations, brilliant to doing work on the ground, fantastic people, but the structures aren't just robust enough to give confidence to funding or funders when you go looking for funding off them. That's something that can be, I won't say rectified easily, but it can be done. So you need to put in good structure. So board of management, some sort of committee structure, right? So that there's people delegated to certain amounts of work. I'm not saying have 10 committees because that doesn't work. I'm not saying have committees with 10 people or 15 people in it because that doesn't work either. Small number of committees with a small number of people gets way more work done, right? 4 or 5 people on the committee, fantastic. Okay, 3 or 4 committees, a finance committee, fundraising committee, and another committee that's in specifically what you're doing in terms of whether it be like say sports development or club structures or whatever it might be. But that you at least have at least 2 committees that are responsible for getting work done. Your committee structure allows you to bring in additional people from your village, your town, your parish that don't necessarily want to get involved in the board or come on as a board director or get involved in the board of management, but they're willing to give their time to a specific thing that they're interested in. Okay, so that example I gave earlier on of Recovery Haven, the cancer support group, they have an excellent volunteer. It's all volunteers, an excellent volunteer structure. They've identified volunteers who are interested in certain things. So they've got amazing landscape gardens because they're volunteers who like gardening. And that's all they do is volunteer to help out in the garden, look after the garden. They don't get involved in listening or get involved in fundraising. They're a very good dedicated fundraising team who don't get involved in the garden, who don't get involved in listening. And they're a very good listening team in terms of counseling who are very good at what they do. They don't get involved in the fundraising, involved in the gardening or involved in other things. It's like a company with an accounts department, production department, marketing department, and finance department or something. They all work to the same aim, but they all work independently of each other and have very specific roles. That's good because a lot of people didn't get involved in something they have an interest in. I'm involved in coaching because my kids are there. I'm not the best coach in the world. I don't have a huge interest in learning more about coaching. I'm just there to help out. Okay. I got involved in the development committee because that's what I do for a living. And I'm involved in something I do, but I don't get involved in backpacking. I don't get involved in lining the pitch. I don't get involved in making teas and coffee. I don't get involved in all that kind of stuff. Right. So I do what I'm good at and what I want to do, and other people do what they're good at and what they want to do. But it allows you to build your committees, allows you to build your team. The experience you have, if you've got experience, if there's people on your board, on your committees that have experience in specific things like say finance, marketing, business, accounts, legal, social media, whatever it is, ask them, what's your job, what you do, put in there, because they're bringing that experience to your organization. Okay, Tom O'Leary has the following, Joe Bloggs has the following experience, things like that. If they're community people and worked in the community for many, many years, they got community experience, put that in there as well. Your track record, you don't have to give them like a big, long-winded, detailed background to the organization to say, we're capable of managing public funds. We have managed X amount of funds before. We secured public funding before. We have an excellent track record in fundraising. A couple of lines, all you need. Operational structure, show how the business is run or how the organization is run as a business in terms of your staffing structure, volunteer structure, who's responsible for doing what. How do you manage and evaluate your projects? Again, it's part of the grant process because you have to evaluate your projects for grant purposes, back and feedback to them, a report on what was done with the grant. So very simply, we will build in things like ongoing evaluation is done through a meeting with the team, the staff, the board, maybe quarterly planning sessions with the board or an annual planning session. We will talk to our customers, our clients, the public, our members, our service users. We would get anecdotal evidence back from our staff that are working with them. We do get them to evaluations, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We're not saying we bring in external evaluators. If you've got someone that's providing care to an older person in a community as a volunteer, the feedback you get from that person anecdotally through a team meeting or a staff meeting or just conversations and evaluation. It doesn't have to be all formal forms and surveys and stuff like that. Just feedback and anecdotal information is perfectly fine. And experience managing public funds, very important because they want to know that you've experienced. If it's like say local authority, they know you anyway. If you managed funds before that they've given you, they know you. Like people in local authorities, and I should build back this up, they talk to each other. We've got an application here from like, XYZ group. What do they like to do with? I haven't dealt with them before. Oh, they're a great group. Or geez, run a mile from them, they're a disaster to work with. People are like, we're human beings. We're not machines that are assessing applications. We want to find out, can we find out a bit more about these before we give them money or before, we're confident that they're good. We want to give them money, but we just want to make sure, we want to look for some sort of reassurance that they're the best ones to go with. Like if you're hiring someone for a job, brilliant CV, brilliant interview, you want references as well though, because it could be just good a line on their CV and we're able to BS at their interviews. Some people write an awful lot of fiction on their application forms. In reality, it doesn't happen afterwards. They get away with it once, they won't get away with it a second time. This is an important one, and this is kind of where I would say it's the trick of the trade I used to use because now everyone's doing it because it's in every application form. Before it wasn't, but it was great because it was always giving people an advantage. Now it's sought for in terms of how your project ties in with local and regional and national strategy, okay? This is something that organizations struggle with because they find out, well, how am I supposed to know? where do we begin to look at these things, right? So there's going to be standard policy documents that everyone should have access to, and they're all available widely. They're all available online, or they're available directly from the various departments. But they're all online. You can download them as PDF documents. The most important one at the moment, and it's kind of one that all funding is kind of backed by, is our rural future, the rural development policy 2021-2025. That's the big strategy for Ireland in terms of developing rural areas, right? So all the money is going into under the RDF funds or the remote working hubs or all those things, tourism, heritage, all that kind of projects, outdoor recreation, activity projects, outdoor activity, all that stemmed from the rural development strategy and policy, right? The county development plan, every county has a county development plan. Carlow will have one too. Every county's got a tourism strategy and action plan. Most in the past now, it's all I think it's tied now into county development plans mostly, but some areas would have local area plans for a local district area. You have the outdoor recreation plan. So if you're involved in outdoor recreation, Thai towns, community gardens, any sort of maybe local tourism project, anything like that. Again, the outdoor recreation plan is Ireland's strategy around developing outdoor recreation and their policy around that. And then the climate action plan, which is really important because everything now has to be linked back to climate action. Okay. So what I would suggest you do is you download all these as PDF documents. Okay. Now they are really, really boring documents to read. You're not going to read them cover to cover. All I do is if I'm working on a project that's say sports or recreation or respite or disability or youth or whatever it is, right? I download the documents, I go into the PDF and I search for keywords, and the keywords are relevant to my project. Okay, so there's no point in me looking at a county development plan, looking at their housing strategy, looking at their roads and infrastructure strategy, wastewater strategy, if it's nothing to do with my project. If I'm dealing with a project that's dealing with, say, sports and recreation, I look at the parts of the plan that have objectives that are relating to sports and recreation. If it's enterprise, I look at the parts that are relevant to enterprise. So I'm not reading from cover to cover, okay? And what I do is this. I then document in a table, like the one in front of you. Now, it seems like, geez, there's an awful lot of hard work in this, right? And there is. This is time consuming, this part of it. But you only have to do it once, because if you look at the timeline, this rural development policy is 2021 to 2025. It's not going to change for another 3 years or 2.5 years, okay? Your county development plan, I'm not sure if Carlow has completed theirs not yet, will be a 5-year plan. It's not going to change for 5 years. So you don't have to do this every week. You just do this once and it's done, okay? So what I do is, this is for a project that is in Artfurt, the local village to me here. We did an RDF application for them. And part of that was to provide sports and recreation facility, and it was to free up space in their existing community hall to provide service for older people, stuff like that, in terms of heritage, tourism, enterprise, and other things. So we looked at the various different strategies up here: the National Development Plan, the Southern Regional Assembly Plan, Kerry County Development Plan, Kerry Local Community Economic Plan, and then the Tralee Municipal District Plan. We went into keywords: sports, recreation, accessibility, community supports, young people, heritage, enterprise job opportunities, and social enterprise. And we looked for keywords under each of these strategies, and we found the objectives that were relating to those areas, right? So these NPOs, these are just the name or the number of the objectives or strategies, so or policy, excuse me. So regional policy objective number 7, regional policy objective number 191, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Now, if you're assessing the application, you saw this table, straight away, visually, you say, wow, this project is aligned with a lot of stuff that's happening at a regional, local, regional, national level, because they've actually identified our objectives with our strategies that are relevant to their project. Okay, you only need to do this once, because none of these will change for 5 years. Okay, there is a bit of work involved in it. Don't get me wrong, there is, and it is time consuming, it is boring too, to be honest, but it's something you do once and it's there then. Okay, so very visually, if you put this into an application form with the space, or if you put it into supplementary documentation that they ask for, visually, they can say there's a lot going on there. Will they go in and check all of them? Of course they won't go in and check all of them, but you're not going to lie to me, they're not going to make up these numbers. But the key thing is that you're showing them it is relevant to all these objectives. It is relevant to national policy. Okay, it is a good idea to give us money to do these things, because you have to give money to do these things in the first place. Does that make sense to everyone? Okay, so it's looking at how does it fit into the overall context. As I said earlier, next year, leader funding is all about climate, environment. You need to be focused on the climate action plan in terms of how your project can go some way to assist to reduce carbon emissions. So for example, every project we put forward now, whereas if it's a capital project, it results in a building, we talk about solar energy, we talk about renewable energies, we talk about very well insulated buildings, we talk about putting electric vehicle charging points, right? All things that are leading towards reducing carbon emissions. We try to encourage paperless offices, so everything's done online. We try to look at rainwater harvesting within the building. We talk about using our community space, our community meeting space, to run information sessions on how to reduce your energy costs. So even if you're not renting yourself, but we can help and facilitate, that's meeting some of the climate action goals. Okay, so just thinking slightly about how innovative we can be here within our application form. The next thing is matching funds. So it will tell you what the percentage is. That's guaranteed, it always will. If it's not clear, pick up the phone and ring them and ask them what the percentage is. They will also ask you, is your project quotations inclusive or exclusive of VAT? If you're registered for VAT, some organizations are, you can only put in the amount that's ex-VAT. So let's say it's €1,000 plus VAT. You can only claim for the €1,000 part of it because you can claim the VAT back. If in some cases you're not registered for VAT, it would ask for proof from revenue or your accountant that you're not registered for VAT. So in some cases, look at the cash matching requirements. In some cases, they will ask for maybe, let's say 25% matching funds from the organization, but at least 5% of that needs to be cash matching. That's important because if they look for some element of cash matching funds, you have to have that cash matching funds in your account at that time. Okay, not saying to them we hope we'll get it or we presume to get it or we know we'll get it. It has to be in your bank account at that time. Okay, if it's a loan that you're using, there has to be a loan agreement in place with your bank. So the options will include money held in your account. That could be reserves, or it could be revenue from fundraising that you lodged into the account, or revenue from sponsors you lodged into the account, but it has to be in your bank account. Loan could be bridging loan, or for the purpose of paying for the project first and then drawing down the grant afterwards, or a term loan of whatever it is. That has to be detailed by the bank in terms of the term, the interest rate, and the repayments per month. Some applications have a template you have to complete, or the bank have to complete and sign. Others will just look for you to provide that information for them. So if you're not too sure what it is, you just ring the bank and say, how much will 10,000 be over 5 years? What's the interest rate? And what will the loan repayment be every month? Okay. And then in-kind contributions, where it allows you to put in-kind contributions or voluntary labor in the application form, just be careful in what they will accept and what they won't accept. Okay, that can get kind of complicated because if you're allowed to include voluntary labor as part of your matching funds, there's ways they determine how you cost that. Okay, normally they will give detailed information on it, but if you're not sure, contact them. Okay, in some cases, some applications like Leader, for example, they'd allow that. Others they mightn't allow it, but you still put it in, as we are also going to, as well as having matching funds in place, we're also going to do the other elements of projects through voluntary labor or in kind. Okay. No harm to mention it because it shows again that you're thinking it through. In terms of the quotations, then, if your project is providing goods and services, right? So let's say tutors, training courses, equipment, IT equipment, furniture, garden materials, paint, whatever it is, right? Once it's less than €5,000, you just need basically a quotation from one is fine. Ideally, you look for more than one quote, but one quotation is fine. Okay. You can get verbal quotes. Again, I would always look for an email quote or just a written quote from the supplier. Email perfectly because it's easier to keep it and have it on file. If your project is between €5,000 and €25,000, you need to have 3 quotations as a minimum. Okay, it's important that when you are looking for quotations that you have a brief in terms of what you're looking for quotation on, and as detailed as you possibly can be, that same brief is emailed to various different suppliers. Okay, you keep a copy of the email that you sent to them, right? they email back their quotation, and you keep a copy of the quotation you got back. It's important that you keep the email copy because you need to prove that you sought that quotation before the deadline. Some groups think I only got three quotations. I need a third quotation. I didn't get it. Or I've emailed out, I just asked someone randomly for a quotation, but I didn't give them a brief. If it's ever checked by the department, they want to see paper trail. Who did you email the quotes to? Who did you email the brief to? If you change the brief at any point, you have to email back a new brief to them to make sure they're quoting for the same thing. I'm going to say this out loud. You might have done it yourselves. You might be aware of it. I'm not recommending it at all. Just be careful where you look for a supplier, okay, to find say you've got a supplier that you always use and they're the best that you can find and they're great and you really like them and they're from the local community and you want to use them. That's fine, nothing wrong with it. And they have to submit a quotation. And you say, well, I need 2 more quotations. They say, that's grand, sure, I'll get you 2 more quotations. I'll get on some of my colleagues, I'll get on some other suppliers, and I'll get you 2 additional quotations, okay? And they email you those quotations from their email, okay? If they're going to identify 2 suppliers for you, okay, you need to get those suppliers' names and you need to contact them to get them to email the quotation back to you directly, okay? Otherwise, the trail is not the right trail. You need to contact them. They say, I'll give you a quote, and they contact you back with the quote, not done through a third party, through the preferred supplier, because then it's obvious that supplier has staged these quotations for you. That's not a competitive process. It's not something you should be doing, okay? We all know it happens because you want to use someone, but you have to get 3 quotations in, okay? That's up to 25,000 euros. Anything beyond 25,000 euros, you have to put it up and advertise it on e-tenders. And that's it can be a complicated enough process if you haven't done it before. And it's something you need to do properly because it's a public tendering process. You need to make sure that you're doing everything properly, because if someone tendered for it and got turned down, they can ask why they were turned down and they can track the process that you used and has to be all above board, okay? This is something that I would suggest that all of you get some sort of training on or advice on, or you go onto the public procurement or the department's website and go on their online resources in terms of their tutorials and the information on how to use e-tenders, because it can be a complex enough process, and it's a process you have to go through once you go beyond 25,000. If it's a building project, a works project, if your project value is over 50,000 euros, you have to go through e-tenders. If it's below that, you have to get 5 quotations. Getting 5 quotations in today's market is difficult because most builders won't quote, or most suppliers won't give a quote, but you have to have them. If you have a situation where you literally cannot find another organization or supplier to supply you with the product or service or whatever you need because they're just not out there, or you've contacted them but they didn't come back to you with a quotation, that's okay. You can put in saying, look, we sought application or quotations from suppliers, they just didn't come back to us with a quotation, or they were unable to, or we couldn't find anyone locally. There's only one supplier of this machine, for example. You have to give a reason as to why you've only got 1 or 2 quotations back. Okay, very important. You can't just submit 2 quotations and not explain why it's only 2 and not 3 or not 5 or not a tendered process that you're in through. This is government policy, it's procurement policy. There's no way around it. You have to comply with it, and it has to be done properly. Otherwise, you will run into problems when you're going to draw down the money. For example, if you get a quotation from Tom O'Leary, okay, and then you decide in 2 months' time when you get the grant and you're actually doing the work, you use Joe Blogs, and you got a receipt in and an invoice in from Joe and a receipt in from Joe and a payment going to Joe, but you never got a quotation from Joe, that's going to cause you problems. Okay, so if you decide to change supplier, you need to confirm and contact them and agree with them that you're changing supplier, and it has to be done in writing. For most applications you're submitting, the department needs to be aware that you're changing the supplier for whatever reason it is, has to be agreed in advance by them. Okay, usually not a problem with it. But I know like during COVID, a lot of people were finding it hard to get supplies because there are a lot of suppliers not in stock, or they're out of stock and they had to change suppliers. That was all fine. They just contacted the department and said, look, we were going to go with XYZ, we can't anymore, we're now going with ABC. Are we okay to do that? They were given approval in writing after they went and got the materials from the other supplier. If you don't get pre-approval, though, you're going to run problems when you're doing a drawdown. Online applications, it's all the same thing we just talked about all along. It's now online. That does cause problems for people because they're not used to using online applications, or not used to. There are some people just don't like using computers. They're not great at IT, and that causes problems. Identify someone in your group that knows their way around a computer and they've no problem with uploading files and working through online applications, because it just make it easier for them. Usually it's done through a dedicated portal, so like an online portal through the department site, or it's an emailed application that's just emailed in by email. That's just a standard application. It's done on Word document or converted to PDF document and emailed with all the attachments on an email. Or it's a portal where you actually go into the portal and upload everything onto the portal. Everything needs to be, all documentation needs to be uploaded. So as I said, if you've got hard copies of your documents, like your accounts, constitution, policy, procedures, you need to scan them and have them available as PDF documents. Okay, so converting them to PDF, scan them, convert them to PDF. Isn't that difficult to do if you haven't done it before? If you haven't done it before, find someone that has done it and knows what they're doing. Usually the application forms are more condensed. They usually ask for less information than standard paper-based applications used to in the past. They normally only allow you a certain amount of words or what sort of word? Words or blank. This words or what's the word, you know?
Characters.
That's thanks, Phil. Yeah, the steam coming up my ears there. Yeah, so words and characters, and that's difficult because sometimes you want to give them more information, but you're not allowed to because you're limited in what you can say, right? Anyone who's done a sports capital application would be familiar with this. You're be very good at editing your descriptions because you're very limited on the space to fit in the application. What I recommend you do on this is, and why I do it, is I do the application. I take the application form online and I convert it into a Word application. So I just take the headings, I put in the headings on a Word document, and I fill the application out on a Word document. I can use the Word document to edit the application in terms of spell check, and I can also use to do word count or character count, and then I cut and paste it back into the application form. Okay, it's just easier because you're used to, people used to using Word documents rather than trying to use an application. Sometimes there's no editing functions on the application form online, so do them Word, edit it on Word, and then just transfer it across. The other reason I do that is that sometimes on the online portals, once the application form is submitted, it's gone, and you can't see it anymore. Okay, if you've got a copy of it on Word, a version of it done in Word, you can now go back to see what you applied for, because it's on file, and your own file, and you can also use that Word document for another application form, so you can cut and paste most of that into another application form again. Okay, so it saves you duplicating work when you're looking for maybe doing a lot of applications for the same projects, or you're using multiple grant sources. So again, it's just a way of having your wording standardized in an application in a Word document and have that on file. Things like location details, they're normally linked now. So you put in your air code and it links it automatically to your location. So know what your air code is. Digital signatures, sometimes it will, by just ticking a box and ticking the terms and conditions and agreeing to them, is your signature. And other times they want you to actually sign it. Some groups say, well, how can I sign it if it's online? Again, just get a digital signature is literally simply writing your name in black ink on a white piece of paper, taking a photograph of it and saving that as an image, and you can then cut and paste that image into the actual PDF document or Word document or whatever it might be. Most of the online portals, though, they don't look for signatures. Once you've ticked the box that you're meeting terms and conditions, and you tick the box that you're compliant with the declaration, sorry, you're ticking the box for the declaration form, that's considered a signature then from you. In other areas, they want you to upload a signed document, so you need to be able to digitally sign your documents. They have strict deadlines. Online applications close. If it's 5 p.m. Friday evening, it is 5 p.m. Friday evening. You can't call them and say, look, my email is down, can I send it on to 6 o'clock? That's grand, Tom, no problem at all. I'll be in the office till 6:30 anyway. If the online portal is closed, it's closed. You go in at 5+5, it's shut down, okay? Once it's submitted, you can't edit it after the deadline. Most online applications, you can go back in and you can make edits to them as many times as you want up onto the deadline. After the deadline, you can't access it anymore. The advantages, it can be shorter. It is easier to manage the documentation because all your files are stored electronically anyway. You can work with teams, so you can teams working on the application online remotely. So if you've got, say, committee members, you can be working this at home, working on the application remotely. It does level the playing field because the application forms are simplified. It reduces the amount of additional information some groups that get this work done professionally submit. So years ago, when we were doing applications, we put in supplementary documentation, photographs, letters of support, all this kind of stuff. That's kind of gone now. They don't look for that level of detail anymore. So it does level the playing field slightly. Some applications have autofill sections. So, especially on the financial parts of the application form, it kind of automates the calculations for you, does the additions for you. Again, in some cases, like the sports capital Oscar system, everything's done through the portal. So all your paperwork, all your files, everything is done through the one portal. So it's easier to manage the drawdown as well because you're doing it all through the one space. It does force people and force groups into being more efficient in terms of their description of projects as well, because the fact you've limited amount of space to put in a detail of the project. So it kind of forces you to make a kind of a pitch for your project rather than giving like pages and pages of information. Disadvantages, the word count sometimes can be very, very low. And it does make it difficult to actually sell your projects, to give them enough information to make a decision. You do need to be better at editing skills. You do need passwords and logins. This is major problems for groups because they forget what the passwords are, they forget what the logins are. It does require decent broadband, another major problem for organizations. Don't leave it to the last minute because your broadband's gone down or you're got a bad or slow connection, you miss a deadline because of it. It does require some knowledge of IT. You don't be like a software engineer, but you need to know how to upload files, save files as PDF documents, and be able to move back and forth between applications. A lot of people can, some people aren't great at it. Make sure there's someone in your organization that can. There is strict deadlines. And as I said, some applications, you can't print them and you can't share them for reviewing. So that's why I say do them in a Word document first, and that becomes your kind of base document to use with information on what you submit in the application form. Preparation, have all your documents in one place. Create a project file, have all your documents on that project file. If possible, have it on a shared drive, like a OneDrive or Google Drive. The reason being is that if it's on one person's laptop, if that laptop is stolen, if that laptop breaks, if that person's on holidays, no one else has access to the information, right? Some people put on a USB stick. Do not put it on USB sticks. Have it on a shared drive somewhere that anyone can access. Not anyone that's got permission to access the drive remotely can, so they can be working at home. So let's say I'm working on an application, but I get sick and I'm in hospital for a couple of days, and the application deadline is Friday. And they say, okay, that's fine, Tom. Sure, you have all the stuff up in the OneDrive. We can just access it and we can upload it for you. Okay. If I haven't done that and I'm over in hospital, very, very sick, the application form doesn't go in. So have everything on OneDrive, Google Drive, Dropbox, whatever one you want to use yourself. Have the same login and password details if possible for all applications. That's not probably the most secure thing to be doing in IT, but just makes life easier for you. What I do is, and I'm going to recommend it for everyone, is on your shared drive, have a document which has all your, and again, obviously it's only visible by certain people that are allowed to view this in your organization, has your details like your tax number, your air code, your tax access number, your login and password details, all in one place, so people can access it really, really quickly. Some groups have it on a whiteboard in their office. Don't do that because people are in and out of the office. You want to have all your details, account details, all that on a whiteboard that are visible to everyone. Agree on, and this is a very important one. It's a practical one, but a lot of people make a mistake of it. Make sure that there's a person that is going to be the contact person for the application. Whose name is going on the application and whose email is going on the application. Make sure the email address that you give is an email that's checked regularly. We had a situation last year where a chairperson of a group we're working with who did the application and submitted the application and gave his email, he gave an old email address that he never checks, okay, which nothing wrong with that, you might think, only he never checks it. And they looked for confirmation back they got approved the grant, looked for confirmation of certain things and looked for grant agreement to be emailed back to them within a certain time limit. All that information went to this guy's email, he didn't check. They missed the deadline to get the grant agreement back to them. So they rang up the department and said, what's the story of the grant? We didn't hear anything back. Yes, we sent you out an email about a month ago. Did you not get it? No, what it was sent to, and there was the email in this guy's inbox, and they missed the deadline to get the agreement back to the department. That's mind-boggling, but it happens an awful lot because sometimes volunteers will use their own email addresses. Make sure that the person is aware that they're the contact person, make sure they're available to take any calls, and make sure they're available that they'll check their emails and deal with any correspondence. They won't call you, they'll email you. Okay, they will not pick up the phone and ring you, they'll email you. If you don't get back to them, then you're in trouble. Agree who has admin and editing access. We normally recommend that if you've got one person's responsible for the online application. You could have multiple people working on the application on the Word document, giving you information, providing you with more documentation, whatever it might be. But there's only one person that's responsible for filling the application online. We've had situations where a team of 3 people, I do section 1, I do section 2, I do section 3. That's a disaster. Okay, have one person doing the application online from start to finish. Yes, they might be getting information from other people around them, but they're responsible for it. Okay, because it just you don't know if they've done it or not done it, or if it's completed properly, or they've missed a section or something. You have no control over it. We would highlight the deadline date on our diary, or on a work plan, or on a planner on the wall in an office, but certainly on your diary that you use, marking the deadline for the date of the deadline for the application is submitted, and then work backwards from that in terms of set deadlines to get everything done, and who's responsible for it over the course of time leading up to it. Okay, do not leave it all to last minute and last week. It's too stressful. You won't get an application in correctly. You'll get it in, but it'll be a mess. Okay, and you'll be stressed out. So just give yourself plenty of time. Again, review the guidelines carefully, highlight any criteria on those guidelines that will give you the extra edge when you're applying when you're putting in the application form. Simple filing system. This is one we were done for a demo when we did just for display purposes. So on my hard drive, I have all the applications, all the projects we work on, and then we set up a specific file for that grant, and we've all the information and the documentation for that grant in that file. So I can access it, or my business colleague can access it, or whoever is working on the project team and the organization can access it as well. Okay. When I'm doing the application, I'm literally just uploading the files from here. That might sound like a very simple thing. There's nothing more frustrating when you're trying to find a file and you can't remember where you stored and saved it, and you're searching for maybe an hour, right? If it's all in the one place, well in advance of the deadline, all you need to do when you're putting the application in together and you're uploading your files, you know exactly where they're stored. Okay. Make sure, very important, that these files are relevant to the project. You could be working on multiple projects, right? And you could have the wrong quotation for the wrong project in the wrong file. You could have the wrong bank statement in the wrong location in the wrong file. Okay. Your accounts are fine because that'd be standard. Your tax clearance is fine, standard. Things like quotations, things like the project details, things like bank statements can be different for different projects. Okay, so make sure that they're all checked and make sure that everything here is relevant to this project, and you don't have to worry about them after that. Again, the little portal. Again, if there's registration, if there's a registration process before the deadline, make sure you're aware of that, and you register well in advance. You have your login details ready. Okay. So just the last couple things I say, no, we're going over time. There's the last couple things. There's a couple things here, and they're beyond. I'm not going through in detail, but they're beyond the slides when I send them out to you. Some people struggle with the terminology to use or wording to use in some sections of the application form. One of them is measure and impact. This is standard kind of generic wording that you can use, and you can take obviously tweak it to suit your project. But things like like the impact would be on you mentioned the people going to impact on it. You mentioned then the other people that be impacted indirectly by the project. And then you show how you're going to measure the impact. So things like we're going to use robust evaluation and performance measuring tools. We're going to identify their goals, identify their needs beforehand, and we're going to measure impact afterwards. All these things. So this kind of standard kind of wording you can use in any application form. The other one is this question is asked in all projects or all applications. Will the project proceed without funding? And you're always asked, will it proceed? No, in a limited capacity, or yes. Okay. If you say no, and most people say, no, it won't happen without the funding, you're basically kind of saying then, look, we're kind of blackmailing you as a department here. If you don't give us the money, this won't happen. This service is needed in our community. It won't happen unless you give the money to do it, right? If you say yes, you run the risk of them saying, well, if it can't happen without our funding, why are you looking for a grant? Okay. So you say it can happen in a limited capacity. So you're saying to them that we've identified the need for this in our community. We have to do it. We will do everything we need to do with grant aid if the grant aid is made available. If it's not made available, we'd have to do it in a reduced capacity and we'd have to scale it back. But we won't have the impact that we're hoping to have. Okay. So you're saying to them, as an organization, we are committed to doing this anyway, but we'd have to do it in a lot less, a scaled back version of it if we don't get grant aid to it. So therefore, by giving us grant allows us to do this at a level we need to do it at. Okay. Saying no, that's not good enough, because that's shown that you've done the capacity to take this on, or to even look at alternative ways of doing it. That's just basically giving up on it if you don't give the grant. That's not blackmail, it's too strong a word to use. That kind of saying it's either yeah or no, guys. You know, if you don't give us money, we're not going to do it. We'll tell the community they can go away because we're not going to get money out of it. You do the limited capacity. You're going to say we're going to try to do it, but give us the money. We can do it so much better. Okay. So everyone says, what should I put in? Should I put in no? Yes. Most people put in no, but you're not given an opportunity then to state how you as an organization can try and do it. You're trying to give, again, you're trying to show that you're a good organization. You're not going to say no to the very first obstacle. You're going to try and get around it. The question of displacement, we mentioned it earlier. It's hugely important. Government agencies, government departments, local authorities, local development companies will not give funding if they feel that that fund is going to displace funding that's going to another source, or it's going to create competition in an area for resources, okay, or it's going to cause duplication. You have to show how it's not going to cause duplication, how it's not going to displace. Use words like value adding. So you're going to add value to existing projects, or you're going to complement other projects, or you're going to collaborate with other projects. There are three key words: complement, add value, and collaborate. That just moves them away from displacement, duplication, and competition. Okay, so collaboration, complements, and adding value is key. Okay. Okay, so this last slide, I promise you. So basically, look, for anybody that's worked ever in a private capacity in sales, you'd be familiar with, you know, the sales pitch and putting your best case forward to get that sale. Applying for grant is where you're selling your organization to the funder to get money. So they're basically, you're convincing them that your project is the best project, the same way that a salesperson is convincing you that their product is the best product. Okay, so it's a sales pitch. And with any sales pitch, you need to understand the person you're pitching to. So if you know the organization you're pitching to, you know what they want, what they don't want, what they support, what they won't support, where their priorities are, where their strategy is, what their policies are, it makes it easier for you to tweak and to define and to tailor your project to suit what they need. Okay, not completely changing your organization or changing your project to meet their requirements, but certainly putting what's relevant to them, you know, kind of first and foremost in the application and in their minds. Make sure it's relevant to them, which if it's not relevant to them, you'd be questioning why would someone apply, but make sure they're aware that it's relevant to them. Not that you're presuming they know, presume they don't know, and you need to spell it out to them. Identify how your project benefits their aims. So how are you actually helping them in their organization fulfill their objectives? Okay, they need to do this anyway, you're just going to do it for them. Are there features of your project meeting their criteria and aims? If there is, specifically state what parts of your project meets their aims. Okay, so for example, a lot of community centres now are putting in co-working spaces and remote working spaces because that meets the remote work policy the government have. Okay, so what they're saying is that we're going to give part of our community space, we're going to convert it into remote working space with desks for people who want to work remotely in our rural parish. We've got in broadband, and that's meeting the government's objectives of their remote working policy. It's very clearly stating the project and how it matches that policy. Does it represent value for money? Okay, this is a question that people say, how can I say that? Value for money looks at the money that's spent on your project, how it's going to impact as many people as possible within your community, within your parish, within your village, within your town, both directly and indirectly. Okay, because they're going to compare giving you grant aid with another project, and they say, well, actually, it's going to be more bang for our buck here if we give it to a project over in Kilkenny or a project in Laois, as opposed to giving the project here in Carlow. Okay, because there's less people living in the community that they're looking for money, there's more in this community over here. So you need to show it's going to represent value. If you can show there's going to be saving to the state because of what you do, recreational facilities, supporting recreation, supporting respite, disability services, older person services, anything that's basically that the state should be providing, but they're not providing, that's going to save the state money, show how it's going to save the state money. If your project is an enterprise project and it's going to create jobs, show how there's going to be return on the state investment by the benefits to the local economy. So for example, if you're putting a remote working space or a co-working space into your community building, and that's going to create jobs and there's people working out that building, and let's say there's 5 jobs created because they're working out that building, and let's say they're all on 50,000 euros a year salary on average, that's 250,000 euros that's going back to the local economy. Over 10 years, that's 2.5 million euros a year, or 2.5 million euros over 10 years. They might be giving you a grant for 100,000 euros. That's a serious return on investment on the economy, or on the exchequer and on the local economy. So state those things. Is the impact benefit of your project easily demonstrated? Can you demonstrate the impact and can it be measured? Yes, it can be. Okay, you can ask people, how did this project benefit you? How did putting a recreational park in the village with a walkway, how did that benefit people? Because people could walk in a secure, safe area. How did putting floodlights around the GA pitch benefit the local community? Because people can walk in a floodlit area at night time, do couch to 5K going around the pitch, where they can't walk on a rural road because there's no lighting. That's impact to the local community. How does it impact, providing office space? Impact means is people working in the town again, they're now working in remote working spaces, they're benefiting local shops, cafes, etc. Can we demonstrate that? Of course we can, because we can say who's in there. Can we measure it? Absolutely, because we can ask them, how does this benefit you? Does that have to be done through any sort of really detailed professional evaluation? Just simply say, how are you getting on? How did it benefit you? What difference does this make to your life? And document it. And finally, do they trust you? The last question, do I trust this organization enough to give them money? The same way that I said earlier, if you won the lotto and you're lining people outside your door looking for money off you because you had a grant, who would you give the money to? The people you trust walking out that door with your money, that they're going to spend it correctly, honestly and fairly, and come back and report back easily to you in terms of how your money benefits the community. That's all they want to know. And it's up to you to present that in words on an application form. You want an opportunity to pitch this to them at a meeting or through a presentation, has to be done through words on paper. So make sure those words are hitting all the right notes. Okay, I'm going to stop the share, stop talking because I'm going way over time. There's a lot in there. The recording will be there for you to go back over. The slides have the information. There's links that you've seen there in the slides to various different sources as well. Use those. The one thing I will finish up with, and it's the most important thing is, and Trish mentioned earlier on as well, don't be the soldier who takes this on your own, okay? Make sure you've got a team around you to do it. Not a big team. Big teams cause problems, right? Big teams make camels out of horses, okay? So you need to look at a team of people you trust. They're going to do the work they say they're going to do it, not say I'll do that and then don't do it. I would say 3 to 4 people tops, okay? It doesn't have to be the officers of the organization at all. It can be coordinator, it could be administrator, it could be volunteers, but there has to be a core team of people there. If you do one right and you do it successfully, you get funded, okay? Use that as your base foundation for all the rest of them, okay? Because you know that formula works then. Most application forms, 80% of the application forms are the exact same in terms of the questions they ask, okay? Your organization details won't change. Your organization roles, purpose won't change. Your project you're looking for funding for, some cases won't change because the same project you're looking for funding for, okay? So a lot of information that they require and request you'd have anyway from previous applications. File it, put it away, have it safe. But as Trish said earlier on, and I've been saying it constantly for the last 2.5 hours, it's not about the application form, it's about the preparation that goes into the application form. Think of the analogy of baking a cake. I have the recipe, who's bought the ingredients? No one, you don't get a cake, okay? Even though you know how to make it, you can't because you don't know the ingredients put into it. The pre-planning, the documentation is so important here. If you're struggling with criteria, struggling with the application process, struggling with what they want, what they don't want, pick up the phone, ring them, or even better again, email them and ask them. Most now grants, they come with a further information guidelines. Most departments now do webinars on how to do the applications. They'll invite you to the webinar to attend the webinar to get more, because And people say, geez, they're giving us a lot of information. They want to make sure that the applications coming in are rubbish applications. They're not doing this for your sake, they're doing it for their own sake to make sure that they're getting good quality back. Because I've been on the other side of the table, Trish, you might have been as well, where you're assessing applications, and it's a nightmare job, you know, because some of them are just absolutely terrible. And you're like going, how do I go back and say their application was terrible? How can I give them some sort of positive feedback here? So they want to make sure that everyone's given the opportunities to put something in that's good, well presented. So they give you the guidelines, they give you the webinars, they give you, you know, helplines, they give you whatever they want to give you to make sure that everything comes in on time and well. Okay. Any questions on any of that? Do we cover it, or does it all make sense to you, or are you more terrified than ever?
Tom, that was really, really, really wonderfully said and researched by you, and exceptionally well presented and very informative. No, I think it's really important to say that, because we deliver and facilitate a lot of training, and sometimes it doesn't quite hit the mark, but I think you have ticked every single box and beyond it, Tom, what we wanted for our group. So I hope everybody would agree with that and that they found it all really beneficial. Also, the fact that it's recorded and it's going to be a useful resource for lots of groups in the future. I could just add on to what Tom is saying. There's no point in dreaming up plans about applying for grants. I think that before you even consider that, and before you even do your groundwork, formulate your people that you need around you to start working on plans for what you want to do with your groups. That's where it starts. It doesn't start with getting the bit of paper or the link to the application one. It starts with knowing who you have and what you're going to do and what the project aims are going to be. Just to add on to a couple of things Tom said there, if that's okay, is that the PPNs, most of them, and certainly in Carlow, we have completed another useful tool which people will find on our website. It's the Carlow Wellbeing Vision. And the Wellbeing Vision encompasses a lot of the work around the vision of the people and communities around the county want for their future. So that's a useful tool to copy and paste from when you're making applications, because it demonstrates what the communities want. And also I did a small little thing here, which is, people often think that the only way you're going to be effective with your group and with your projects is to get loads of money. Sometimes the small little wins can be so effective. 300 here, 500 there, 1,000 there. And it allows you the time to build up the capacity and the resources about what you want to say in the future. I think that's really important, because, and also you're practicing for small amounts of money. And I think that's a really useful thing as well. And also in terms of what Tom was talking there about too, around climate and environment becoming much more to the fore, and what we can do about that. The PPN in Carlow, we also participated in something called Climate Conversations this year and last year. And again, you can go onto our website, you copy and paste the ideas that people have about things that they want to see happening in Carlow. And you can use those again for your application forms if you want to apply for grants. And I think that's all I wanted to say, Tom, to add on to what you said. I really enjoyed this one. I hope everybody did. Let's just see, Tom, if there's any questions in the chats. Compliments, Tom, that's all I see.
That's great.
Thanks, Tom. Super presentation. Yeah. Okay. Who was the other girl? Elena said thank you. Tom Brady had to leave. He said thank you as well. He really enjoyed it. We're looking forward to seeing the rest. So, has anybody got any questions? Do you want to talk to us for a minute before Tom goes? He's already over time. He's very generous. Linda, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I think really, Trish, you hit the nail on the head. Thanks so much to Tom. Like, so much clarity today. You know, lots of, I suppose, grey areas and kind of light bulb moments today after just a presentation. So well done, Tom. It's not easy to do that on Zoom for a long time. So fair play to you.
Appreciate that. Thanks.
Tom. We'll be talking to you again, Tom.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah.
Anybody else want to say anything? No?
Can I just say something?
Monica says thanks. Yeah, Philip, go ahead.
Yeah. Thank you, Tom. That was a brilliant presentation. It's difficult for groups to understand what's in grant applications, and I think some give up. But you did say a couple of things. It's having a right team behind you, knowing exactly what you want, but more importantly, what you can do. It's no point having, you know, plans that you're just not going to achieve. You're going to waste your energy and your time in it. Something else you said, and I'm sort of mindful of it here where I live, and even in Carlow, is sort of, we say in the GAA circle here, we have 3 parishes that combine and play the GAA. The expertise between them they cross over. Each parish has its own development committee, but because they're all linked on the GAA club, they do talk to each other. They find out information off each other. I think if I use Carlow as an example, because my heart's across the border, and I'll say Mount Leinster Rangers, Ballymurphy, Boris and Rahana, again, all three have their own development committees and in their parishes, but on the field they combine as the Mount Leinster Rangers, mainly because they were crap when they were all playing individually, but as they've recently done, they won the All Ireland Club. But it is knowing people around you and also combining your resources and your strengths.
Thanks, Philip. That's really, really good as well. We were saying that earlier on. Anybody else before we go?
No.
Well, look, we'll be sending out, Tom's going to send on the links for the recording, and he's also going to send us on the presentation, which we will then circulate to everybody this week. But you know where I am, and if you want to contact me in the PPN, you have my number and you have our email address. You can call us anytime. And Tom, I think that's it, is it?
Yeah, I just want to say this, thanks, Trish, for the opportunity this morning to present the training for you. As I was saying at the start, we do a lot of work with PPNs across the country and a lot of local development companies as well. And we constantly say to communities when we're out there on the streets, on the road, and in communities across, many parishes across mostly Munster and sometimes up of Niche as well, more recently, that there's resources locally to you through the likes of PPNs and local development companies and local authorities as well that are there to support and assist and advise and to encourage and to do as much as you possibly can and to avail those resources, because we do live in a country where there is unbelievable community and voluntary spirit and support, and without community or volunteers across every single village in the country, this country would be at a standstill many years ago. And that's across every sector, whether it be sports or schooling or just whatever. It's unbelievable. The government, in fairness to them, want resources best they possibly can, and they want to make that resource available to you. But it's up to you to, my mantra when I worked in the local development sector was, my job was to bring the money into the county. Okay, your job is bring the money into your community group, into your community that's going to benefit the people locally. Okay, so I wish you the best luck with it. Over next year, there's going to be lots of things happening. There's going to be lots of funding out there, I think, over the next 12 months. And 2023 is going to be a good year, I think, for the sector. There's been, lots more grants coming up, 2024 as well. After that, crystal ball, God knows what's going to happen in terms of the next 5 years. But there'll always be support to the sector, and always has been. So I want to wish you the best luck with all your applications going forward and in the work you do on the ground, regardless of money. Money's only tiny part of this. Is the resources and human resources that are most important. And that's what should sustain more so than money, is getting people involved with your projects, sustaining that. Look at succession, look at getting new people on board every year, not many people, but a couple of people every year coming on board to freshen things up, to bring energy. Look at young people in your communities too, that get them involved, okay, because they're the future. So human resources are more important than financial resources, but we do need the money. So I do wish you the best luck in getting funds and other fundraising and other sponsorship you look at down the line as well. The best luck with that, and the best luck with your projects. And again, just thank Trish and Carlow PPN for giving me the opportunity to meet you in Zoom. I'd love to meet you in person. It would be a long way away, but the good thing about technology is that we can do this from many miles away, and that's great. So again, thanks very much for everyone, and again, apologies for going over time this morning, but I think it was worth it probably, hopefully.
It was. Thanks very much, Tom. I really appreciate it. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks,
Have a good
everyone.
week, and we'll see you
Thanks very
soon.
much.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.